My name is Marcus, and today I'm going to tell you about the night I heard a voice that would completely shatter the prison I'd built inside my own mind. But before I continue, if this story resonates with you, please subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who's carrying burdens they can't seem to put down, and leave a comment below about what's weighing on your mind right now. You're not alone in this struggle. I need you to understand what my life looked like before that night. From the outside, I had it all together. I was 35 years old, a high school history teacher in Portland, married to Emma for 8 years, father to 2 beautiful kids, Lily, who was 6, and Noah, who was 4. I had a modest house in a decent neighborhood, a reliable car, a job I was good at. By most measures, I was living a good life, but inside my head was a different story entirely. Inside my head was a relentless courtroom where I was simultaneously the defendant, the prosecutor, and the judge. Every conversation I had, every decision I made, every interaction with another human being was immediately pulled into this mental court and analyzed, dissected, criticized. Did I say the right thing? Did I hurt someone's feelings? Did I come across as stupid? Did they notice my mistake? What do they really think of me? The thoughts never stopped. They were there when I woke up, replaying yesterday's conversations and dreading today's interactions. They were there during my lunch break, reviewing the morning's classes and finding every flaw, every moment I could have done better. They were there at dinner, watching me interact with my family while simultaneously critiquing my performance as a husband and father. They were there at night, keeping me awake with an endless loop of regrets, worries, and imagined disasters. Emma had started to notice. Of course she had. How could she not notice that when she talked to me, I was only half present? That my eyes would glaze over mid-conversation as my mind spiraled into some internal analysis of whether I was being a good enough listener, which ironically prevented me from actually listening. "You're not here," she'd said to me a few weeks ago, frustration and sadness mixing in her voice. "Even when you're sitting right next to me, you're not here. You're somewhere else, in your head, and I can't reach you there." I'd wanted to explain, to tell her about the constant noise, the relentless self-examination, the weight of carrying every word I'd ever spoken and wondering if it was wrong, every choice I'd made and questioning if it was right, every person I'd ever interacted with and analyzing whether they liked me or just tolerated me. But I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. So I just apologized and tried harder to be present, which of course meant I was now also analyzing whether I was being present enough, whether my attempts to be better were working, whether Emma could tell I was trying. The mental weight was crushing me. That's the only way I can describe it. Like I was carrying an invisible backpack filled with rocks. Every rock a thought, a worry, a regret, a fear. And no matter how tired I got from carrying it, I couldn't figure out how to set it down. My teaching suffered. I'd be in the middle of a lesson about the Civil War, and suddenly I'd remember something I'd said to a colleague that morning that might have sounded judgmental, and I'd lose my train of thought. My students would look at me confused, waiting for me to continue, and I'd have to fumble my way back to the lesson while another rock dropped into the backpack. They noticed. They think you're incompetent. You're failing them. My relationship with my kids suffered. Lily would ask me to play with her, and I'd sit on the floor with her dolls, but my mind would be reviewing the parent-teacher conference I'd had that afternoon, replaying every word I'd said to that concerned mother, wondering if I'd been too defensive or not empathetic enough. And Lily would notice that Daddy wasn't really playing, that his body was there but his attention was somewhere else, and she'd quietly put her dolls away and go find Mom instead. The worst part was that I knew I was doing it. I wasn't oblivious to the damage. I could see Emma's disappointment, my kids' confusion, my students' frustration, but knowing didn't help. It just added more weight. Now I was also carrying the guilt of knowing I was letting everyone down and seemingly being unable to stop. 3 weeks before God spoke to me, I'd started having physical symptoms, tension headaches that wouldn't go away. a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe deeply, stomach problems that my doctor couldn't find a physical cause for, exhaustion that sleep didn't fix because my mind never truly rested. "You need to find a way to relax," my doctor had said, with the kind of helpful advice that people who don't understand give. "Maybe try meditation or exercise, something to reduce your stress." But how do you relax when your own mind won't give you permission? When every attempt to rest is interrupted by thoughts of what you should be doing instead, what you failed to do earlier, what you need to worry about next? The night it happened was a Thursday, nothing particularly special about it. Emma had taken the kids to her mother's for the weekend. She did this sometimes when she needed a break, when the weight of living with someone who was physically present but mentally absent became too much. I didn't blame her. If I could have taken a break from myself, I would have. I was sitting on the couch in an empty house, the silence deafening, and the thoughts were louder than ever. A full week's worth of interactions to review, analyze, regret. A student I might have been too harsh with, a colleague I might have offended, a lesson that didn't go as well as it should have. Emma's disappointed face when I'd zoned out during her story about her day. The weight was so heavy I felt like I was being pressed into the couch, unable to move, barely able to breathe, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt light, the last time my mind had been quiet, the last time I'd experienced a moment without the weight. "I can't do this anymore," I said out loud to the empty room. "I can't carry this anymore." And that's when I heard it. Not an audible voice, not like someone speaking in the room with me, but a voice nonetheless, clear, unmistakable, coming from somewhere beyond my endless internal monologue. "Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it." 7 words, simple words. But they landed in my consciousness like a bomb, shattering something that had been building for years. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. What? The voice, or presence, or whatever it was, didn't repeat itself, but the words echoed in my mind. And unlike all my other thoughts, these words brought something with them. A peace, a possibility, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to carry this weight alone. I didn't know what to do with what I'd heard. Didn't know if I was losing my mind or if something real had just happened. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something had to change. Because the weight was killing me, slowly but surely. And I'd just been offered a way to set it down. I just had no idea what that meant or how to do it, but I was about to find out. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Those 7 words kept circling in my mind, but this time they were different from my usual thoughts. My usual thoughts were heavy, critical, exhausting. These words were light, almost buoyant, like they were trying to lift something off me instead of pressing down. "Lay aside the mental weight, I will carry it." I must have replayed them 1,000 times, analyzing them in the way my mind always analyzed everything. Was this real? Had I actually heard something beyond my own thoughts, or was this just my brain's desperate attempt to give me what I needed to hear? Was I having some kind of breakdown? Should I be concerned about my mental health? But even as I spiraled into analysis, there was something underneath it, a knowing, a sense that whatever had spoken those words was real, was other, was offering me something I desperately needed but didn't know how to accept. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went to my home office. I turned on my computer and just stared at the screen, not knowing what to do. Finally, I opened a blank document and started typing. I don't know if anyone is listening. I don't know if what happened tonight was real or if I'm losing my mind. But if you're there, if you really spoke to me, I need help. I need to understand what it means to lay aside this weight. Because I've been trying to manage it, control it, think my way out of it for years, and I'm drowning. I'm failing my wife, my kids, my students, myself, and I don't know how to stop. I sat there staring at what I'd written, feeling foolish. This wasn't prayer. I didn't even know how to pray. I'd grown up going to church sporadically, knew the basic stories, could recite the Lord's Prayer if pressed. but I'd never had any kind of personal relationship with God. Religion was something other people did, something that seemed to work for them, but had never felt relevant to my life. Until now. Until I was desperate enough to hear a voice in my emptiness and believe it might be real. Friday morning came too early. I'd maybe dozed for an hour around dawn, but I felt like I'd been awake for days. I called in sick to work, something I almost never did, which of course triggered a whole cascade of thoughts about whether my principal would think I was unreliable, whether my substitute would judge the state of my lesson plans, whether my students would fall behind because of my absence. But underneath all those familiar thoughts, there was still that whisper, "Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it." I spent most of the day just sitting, on the couch, in the backyard, at the kitchen table, not doing anything productive, not checking items off any list, just sitting with those words and trying to figure out what they meant. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Are you okay? The school called saying you were out sick." I stared at the message for a long time, watching my mind immediately start analyzing. Was she worried? Annoyed? Did this confirm her suspicions that I was falling apart? Should I tell her the truth or make up something about a stomach bug? But then I did something I almost never did. I just responded honestly without overthinking it. Not sick physically, just needed a day. Something happened last night that I need to process. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. What happened? I'll tell you when you get back. I think I might be okay. Maybe. I don't know yet. Okay, I love you. I love you too. I set down the phone and realized my hands were shaking. That simple exchange, honest, direct, without the usual layers of analysis and second guessing, had taken more courage than it should have. But it had also felt lighter, like I'd just set down one small rock from the massive load I was carrying. That afternoon, I did something else I never did. I went for a walk. Not for exercise. I wasn't tracking steps or heart rate or trying to optimize anything. I just walked through my neighborhood, paying attention to things I usually rushed past without seeing. The way the afternoon light hit the trees, the sound of kids playing in a nearby yard, an old man working in his garden who looked up and waved at me. I waved back, and my mind immediately started analyzing. Did I wave too enthusiastically, not enthusiastically enough? Did he think I was weird? But then I heard those words again. Lay aside the mental weight. So I tried something. I imagined taking that worry about the wave, picturing it as an actual rock in my hands and just setting it down on the sidewalk, leaving it there, walking away from it. It felt ridiculous, childish, like some kind of mental game that couldn't possibly work. But I felt lighter, just slightly, just for a moment. I kept walking, and I kept practicing. Every time a worry or regret or analysis popped into my head, I'd imagine it as a rock, picture myself setting it down and keep moving. Some rocks I could barely put down. They clung to my hands, heavy with years of habit. Others were easier to release. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, but in a different way than usual. Not the exhaustion of carrying weight, but the exhaustion of learning something new, of using muscles I'd forgotten I had. That evening, I opened my laptop again and started researching. Not in my usual obsessive way where I'd read 17 articles and still feel like I hadn't learned enough, just gentle curiosity. I typed in "hearing from God" and started reading. I found stories from people who'd heard voices, felt presences, experienced moments of divine communication. Some of them sounded exactly like what I'd experienced. Others were different, more dramatic, more mystical, more certain. But the common thread was that something beyond themselves had reached into their desperation and offered them a way forward. I found articles about anxiety, about rumination, about the kind of mental weight I'd been carrying, learned that what I experienced had names: overthinking, obsessive analysis, mental hypervigilance, that I wasn't alone in this. That thousands, maybe millions of people carried similar weights, trapped in their own heads, unable to find the off switch for their thoughts. And I found verses. Bible verses I'd heard before, but never really understood. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. The words felt both familiar and foreign. I'd heard them in church, seen them on greeting cards, maybe even dismissed them as nice sentiments that didn't really apply to real life. But now, sitting in my home office with the weight of years of mental burden pressing down on me, they felt different. They felt like instructions I'd been given but never followed, like a map I'd been handed but never opened. Saturday morning, Emma came home with the kids. I heard the car pull into the driveway and felt the familiar rush of anxiety. Had I cleaned enough? Would she notice I'd been struggling? Would the kids sense something was wrong with Dad? But then I stopped. Lay aside the mental weight. I pictured each worry as a rock and set them down one by one on the mental sidewalk of my mind. And then I went to greet my family. Lily ran to me first, launching herself into my arms with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of a 6-year-old. "Daddy, we saw Grandma and we made cookies and Noah ate too many and got sick." "I did not," Noah protested, but he was grinning. Emma watched me from the doorway, grocery bags in her hands, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read the signs of my internal state. "You look different." "I feel different. Can we talk after we get the kids settled?" She nodded, still cautious, still guarded. I'd promised to be better before, and then slipped back into old patterns. She had every right to be skeptical. We got the kids situated with a movie in the living room, and Emma and I went to the kitchen. I helped her unpack groceries, and the old me would have been analyzing every movement, every word, preparing what I was going to say, rehearsing and refining and worrying. But I kept practicing that mental motion. Identify the thought, picture it as a rock, set it down. "So," Emma said when we were done, leaning against the counter and crossing her arms. Not defensive, just protective. "What happened Thursday night?" I took a deep breath. "This is going to sound crazy." "Most things about you sound a little crazy lately, Marcus. Try me." I heard a voice, or felt a presence. I don't know how to describe it, but it told me to lay aside the mental weight, that it would carry it for me. She was quiet for a long moment. A voice. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I've spent the last 2 days wondering if I'm having some kind of breakdown. But Emma, something happened. Something real. And I've been practicing, trying to actually put down the thoughts instead of carrying them, and it's helping. I'm not fixed. I'm not suddenly all better, but something is different. How is it helping? I'm here right now, aren't I? Actually here. Not in my head, not analyzing this conversation while we're having it, not worried about whether I'm saying the right things. I'm just here with you. Her eyes filled with tears. You are. You actually are. She came closer, put her hands on my face. "Marcus, I've been so scared that I was losing you to whatever prison you'd built inside your own head, so scared that my kids were going to grow up with a father who was physically present but mentally absent. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. Just keep doing whatever you're doing. Keep being here. Keep trying." We held each other in the kitchen, and I felt the weight of her worry, her fear, her exhaustion from living with someone who was drowning in his own thoughts. But I also felt hope, fragile, tentative hope, that maybe I could actually change, that maybe those 7 words weren't just nice sentiment, but actual instruction, actual possibility. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I told Emma more about the years of mental weight, the constant analysis, the court that ran endlessly in my head. Things I'd never been able to articulate before because I was too ashamed, too worried she'd think I was crazy or weak or broken. She listened without judgment, without trying to fix me, just listening. And when I was done, she said something I didn't expect. "I think you should talk to someone. A therapist. Not because I think you're crazy, but because this is real, and it's been affecting you for years, and you deserve help figuring out how to manage it. I don't know if therapy can help with something that feels spiritual. Maybe it needs both. Maybe you need someone to help you understand the mental health side of this, while you also explore whatever spiritual thing is happening. They don't have to be separate. She was right. I knew she was right. But the thought of sitting in a therapist's office, explaining all of this, having them analyze me, it triggered every anxiety about being judged, being found lacking, being seen as broken. But then I heard it again, softer this time, but still clear. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. Okay, I said. I'll look for a therapist on Monday. Emma squeezed my hand. Thank you. And Marcus, whatever is happening, whether it's God or your brain trying to heal itself or both, I'm glad. Because I've got my husband back at least a little bit, and I've missed him. That night I prayed again, more honestly this time, less awkwardly. God, if that was really you Thursday night, thank you. Thank you for seeing me drowning and throwing me a lifeline. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to lay aside weight I've been carrying for so long I forgot what it feels like to not carry it. But I want to learn. I need to learn. So please, keep teaching me. Keep showing me. Keep reminding me that I don't have to carry this alone. I fell asleep that night. Actually fell asleep, not just collapsed from exhaustion, with those 7 words echoing in my mind. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept through the night without my mind waking me up to analyze the day, worry about tomorrow, or replay every conversation I'd had. The weight was still there when I woke up Sunday morning. But it felt different, less permanent, less inevitable, more like something I could actually, maybe with help, learn to put down. Monday morning felt different. I woke up before my alarm, not from anxiety, but from actual restfulness. For a moment, I just lay there, noticing the absence of the usual mental assault. The thoughts were still there, waiting in the wings, ready to flood in the moment I gave them permission, but they weren't already drowning me. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. I whispered the words out loud, testing them in the morning quiet. Emma was still asleep beside me, and I watched her for a moment, really seeing her instead of seeing her through the filter of my anxiety about whether I was being a good enough husband. The old thoughts tried to creep in. You're just watching her sleep, that's weird. What if she wakes up and thinks you're being creepy? You should be getting ready for work. You're wasting time. You need to plan your lessons. Did you respond to that parent email? I stopped, pictured each thought as a rock, set them down on the mental sidewalk, kept breathing. It was exhausting, this constant practice of releasing, but it was a different kind of exhausting than carrying the weight. This was the exhaustion of learning something new, not the exhaustion of being crushed. At school, I told my principal I needed to leave early on Wednesdays for therapy appointments. Mr. Patterson looked at me with concern and something that might have been relief. Marcus, is everything okay? We've noticed you've seemed stressed lately. The old me would have spiraled. They've noticed, they think I'm failing, they're probably discussing whether to let me go. I need to prove I'm fine, I need to overcompensate. Instead, I just said, I'm working on it, getting help. I appreciate your flexibility with the schedule. Of course, take care of yourself. The kids need you healthy. My first class was American history, 11th graders who were usually more interested in their phones than the Civil War. I'd planned a lesson on the Battle of Gettysburg, but as I stood in front of them, I felt something shift. Before we start today's lesson, I heard myself say, I want to tell you something. I've been struggling lately with anxiety, with overthinking, with carrying mental weight that was making it hard for me to be the teacher you deserve, and I'm working on it. I'm getting help. But I also want you to know that if any of you are struggling with similar things, if your mind won't shut off, if you're carrying thoughts that feel too heavy, you're not alone, and there's no shame in asking for help. The classroom was silent, completely silent, and then Jake, one of my students who usually slept through class, raised his hand. Mr. Carter, do you ever feel like your brain is just too loud? Like there's a radio on all the time that you can't turn off? Yes, I said. Exactly like that. Me too, he said quietly. And then Sarah in the back said, "Me 3." And then 5 more hands went up. We spent the next 10 minutes talking about mental health, about anxiety, about the weight of thoughts. It wasn't in my lesson plan. It had nothing to do with the Civil War, but it was the most important teaching I'd done in months, maybe years. When the bell rang and the students filed out, several of them stopped by my desk to thank me. One girl, Emma Rodriguez, stayed after everyone else left. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you said you were getting help, does that mean like therapy?" "Yes. I'm starting this week." She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I've been thinking about that. My parents think therapy is for crazy people, but I don't think I'm crazy. I just can't stop worrying about everything." "Therapy isn't for crazy people," I said gently. "It's for people who want to be healthier, who want to learn better ways to handle the hard things. There's no shame in it. Would you tell my parents that if I asked them to talk to you?" My mind immediately started racing. That's a big responsibility. What if you say the wrong thing? What if they get angry? What if you make things worse? You're not qualified to give advice about someone else's kid. This could go badly. I picked up each thought, set it down, and looked at Emma. Really looked at her. Saw a 16-year-old girl carrying weight she shouldn't have to carry alone. "Yes," I said, "I'd be happy to talk to your parents if it would help." She smiled. A real smile, the first I'd seen from her all semester. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." At lunch, I sat in my classroom instead of the teacher's lounge, not because I was avoiding people, but because I needed quiet. I pulled out my phone and started searching for therapists. The sheer number of options was overwhelming. Cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, psychodynamic therapy, mindfulness-based approaches. How was I supposed to know which one was right? I almost gave up, almost closed the browser and told myself I'd figure it out later. But then I remembered Emma's words, "I will carry it." So I prayed, right there in my classroom, silently, awkwardly. "God, I don't know how to choose. I don't know what I need. But you told me to lay aside the weight, so I'm asking you to help me find someone who can teach me how to do that. Please." I scrolled through the list again, and one name caught my attention. Dr. Sarah Chen, specializing in anxiety disorders and faith-based counseling. Something about it felt right. I called before I could overthink it. The receptionist answered on the second ring. "Dr. Chen's office." "Hi, I'm looking to schedule an appointment for anxiety and other things." "Doctor, Chen has an opening Wednesday at 4. Would that work?" "Wednesday, 3 days away. I could do this." "Yes, that works." I gave her my information, hung up, and sat there feeling like I'd just done something momentous. I'd asked for help, actually asked for help instead of trying to think my way out of my problems. That evening at home, the kids were more energetic than usual. Noah had a meltdown about his dinner touching on his plate. Apparently peas and mashed potatoes were not supposed to be friends. Lily was singing the same song from her school program over and over at increasingly loud volumes. The old me would have been overwhelmed, would have retreated into my head, analyzing whether I was handling this right, whether I was being too patient or not patient enough, whether Emma was judging my parenting, whether the neighbors could hear the chaos and thought we were bad parents. Instead, I just was there, in the chaos, not analyzing it, just experiencing it. I got down on the floor with Noah, and we built a wall out of green beans to separate his peas from his potatoes. Problem solved. No analysis required. I asked Lily to teach me the song she was singing, and we performed it together, complete with hand motions. She giggled when I got the motions wrong. I didn't analyze whether she was laughing at me or with me. I just laughed too. Emma watched from the kitchen doorway, and when I looked up there were tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing's wrong. You're just here, really here, with them, with us." I forgot what that looked like. After the kids were in bed, Emma and I sat on the back porch. It was a cool October evening, the kind where you could see your breath if you tried. We sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, not talking, just being together. "I made a therapy appointment," I said finally. "Wednesday at 4. That's good. I'm proud of you. I'm terrified. That's okay, too. We swung gently, the chain creaking in a rhythm that was oddly soothing. My mind tried to wander, to Wednesday, to what I'd say in therapy, to whether it would help or if I was beyond help, to whether Emma was comfortable or if we should go inside. But I kept bringing it back. Here, now, this moment. Can I tell you something? Emma said. Always. I've been carrying weight too. Different from yours, but still weight. The weight of watching someone I love suffer and not knowing how to help. The weight of wondering if I was doing something wrong, if I was making it worse, if our kids would grow up damaged because their dad was stuck in his head. I turned to look at her. Emma, I'm so sorry. I never meant to. I know you didn't. That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because when you heard those words, lay aside the mental weight, I think maybe they were for both of us. Maybe I need to lay down the weight I've been carrying too. The weight of trying to fix you, of trying to be enough to pull you out of your head, of feeling responsible for your healing. You're not responsible for my healing, I know, but I've been acting like I am, and I need to stop. I need to trust that you're going to do the work you need to do, and that God or the universe or whatever spoke to you is going to help you, and that my job isn't to carry you, it's just to walk beside you. We sat with that truth for a while, both of us recognizing patterns we'd fallen into without realizing it, both of us seeing how we'd been trying to carry things we were never meant to carry alone. Lay aside the mental weight, I said softly. Both of us, she agreed. Tuesday at school, I had a parent-teacher conference with Emma Rodriguez's parents. I'd called them the day before, explaining that Emma had asked for my support in talking to them about therapy. They'd agreed to meet. Though I could hear the skepticism in Mrs. Rodriguez's voice, they arrived after school, both in their work clothes, both looking tired and weary. I invited them to sit and took a breath, setting down all the rocks that tried to pile up. What if they get angry? What if you say the wrong thing? What if you make Emma's situation worse? You're not qualified for this. Thank you for meeting with me, I began. Emma is a bright student, but I've noticed she seems to be struggling with anxiety. She mentioned she'd like to talk to someone about it, but wasn't sure how to approach you. Mr. Rodriguez's expression hardened. We don't believe in therapy. We believe in prayer and hard work. I understand. I grew up with similar beliefs. But I've recently learned that sometimes prayer leads us to the help we need, and that therapy can be a tool God uses to heal us. Mrs. Rodriguez looked surprised. You're a Christian. I'm learning to be. I just had an experience last week where I heard from God in a very direct way. He told me to lay aside the mental weight I was carrying and that He would carry it for me. And I realized that meant I needed to get professional help to learn how to actually do that. They both softened slightly. This was familiar language to them, a framework they understood. What kind of weight? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. So I told them. About the overthinking, the constant analysis, the mental courtroom that never adjourned, about how it was affecting my teaching, my marriage, my relationship with my kids, about how asking for help wasn't weakness. It was obedience to what God had told me to do. Emma is carrying similar weight, I said gently. I see it in her face, in how she interacts with other students, in how she approaches her work, and I think getting her help now while she's young could prevent years of suffering. Mr. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. My brother had anxiety, killed himself when he was 30. We never talked about it, never got him help, just told him to pray more, work harder. The words hung heavy in the air. I don't want that for Emma, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice breaking. I don't want her to carry what your brother carried. We talked for another 20 minutes. I gave them the name of Dr. Chen explained that she specialized in faith-based counseling, that she understood how to integrate Christian beliefs with therapeutic practice. By the time they left, they'd agreed to at least have a consultation. After they were gone, I sat at my desk feeling both drained and filled, drained from the emotional weight of the conversation, filled with the sense that I'd done something that mattered, something beyond lesson plans and test scores. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Tomorrow was my first therapy appointment. Tomorrow I would start learning officially and professionally how to lay aside the weight. I got up quietly, careful not to wake Emma, and went to the living room. I sat on the couch in the dark and prayed. God, tomorrow I'm going to sit in a stranger's office and admit that I can't handle my own mind, that I need help, that I'm broken in ways I don't know how to fix, and I'm scared. Scared she'll think I'm beyond help. Scared this won't work. Scared I'll always be this way, always be trapped in this mental prison. But you told me to lay aside the weight. You told me you would carry it, so I'm choosing to trust that. I'm choosing to believe that this is part of how you carry it, by leading me to people who can teach me what I don't know, who can help me see patterns I can't see on my own, who can give me tools I don't have. Help me be honest tomorrow. Help me be open. Help me resist the urge to analyze every word I say or perform for the therapist instead of actually doing the work. Help me remember that healing is more important than looking healed. And God, thank you. Thank you for not leaving me in that weight. Thank you for speaking to me when I was drowning. Thank you for starting something that I don't understand yet, but that I'm beginning to trust is real. I sat there in the dark for a long time, not thinking, not analyzing, just being quiet. And in that quiet, I felt it again. That presence, that knowing, that sense of being held by something larger than my own mind, my own ability to cope, my own strength. The weight was still there. It probably always would be there to some degree. My mind was wired to overthink, to analyze, to carry things it shouldn't carry. But I was learning, slowly, imperfectly, that I didn't have to carry it alone. Tomorrow I would take another step in learning how to set it down, and that was enough for tonight. Wednesday arrived with a mixture of grey clouds and unexpected sunshine, the kind of weather that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I felt the same way as I drove to Dr. Chen's office after school, part hopeful, part terrified, completely uncertain about what I was walking into. The office was in a converted house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing clinical or institutional about it. The waiting room had comfortable chairs, warm lighting, and a small fountain in the corner that made gentle water sounds. I sat down, and immediately my mind started its familiar routine. "You're early. That looks desperate. Should you have been exactly on time? What does being early say about you? What if she analyzes your arrival time?" I stopped, picked up the rock, set it down. A door opened and a woman in her mid-40s appeared. She had kind eyes and an easy smile, wearing casual professional clothes that somehow made me feel less anxious about the whole situation. "Marcus, I'm Dr. Chen. Come on in." Her office was even more comfortable than the waiting room. 2 chairs facing each other, not a desk between us. Windows overlooking a small garden. Bookshelves filled with psychology texts, mixed with what looked like spiritual and philosophical books. A small cross on one shelf, subtle but present. "So," she said once we were settled, "tell me what brings you here." And there it was, the question I'd been dreading and anticipating for days. Where did I even start? "I heard a voice," I said, deciding to just jump into the deep end. "Last Thursday night, I was alone, drowning in my own thoughts, and I heard a voice tell me to lay aside the mental weight, that it would carry it for me." Dr. Chen didn't react with alarm or skepticism. She just nodded, like people told her about hearing voices all the time. "And what was the mental weight you were carrying?" So I told her. Everything about the constant analysis, the mental courtroom, the overthinking that had taken over my life, about Emma pulling away, my kids getting a father who was physically present but mentally absent, my teaching suffering, about the physical symptoms, the headaches, the chest tightness, the exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. She listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just giving me her full attention in a way that made me feel truly heard for the first time in years. "That sounds exhausting," she said when I finished. "Carrying all that weight, all those thoughts, all that analysis constantly. How long has this been going on?" "I don't know. Years? Maybe my whole life, but it got worse as I got older. Or maybe I just became more aware of it." "And this voice you heard, do you believe it was God speaking to you?" I don't know. I want to believe it was. It felt other, not like my own thoughts. But I also wonder if I'm just crazy, if I'm having some kind of breakdown. Dr. Chen smiled gently. Well, let me address that directly. Based on what you've described, I don't think you're having a psychotic break. You're not experiencing hallucinations or delusions. You had what sounds like a spiritual experience during a moment of extreme psychological distress. That's not uncommon, and it's not inherently pathological. So I'm not crazy. You're struggling with severe anxiety, particularly with rumination and metacognition, thinking about thinking. But no, you're not crazy. You're someone whose mind has developed some very unhelpful patterns that are causing you significant distress. And the good news is, those patterns can be changed. I felt something release in my chest. Just hearing a professional say I wasn't crazy, that this was something that could be addressed, lifted a weight I didn't know I was carrying. How do I change them? I asked. That's what we're going to work on together. But first, I want to talk about this message you received. Lay aside the mental weight, because I think that's actually profound wisdom, whether it came from God or from your own unconscious mind desperately trying to help you. No, what do you mean? You've been carrying thoughts and worries and analyses as if they're your responsibility to hold on to, as if letting them go would be irresponsible or dangerous. But thoughts are just thoughts, Marcus. They're not facts. They're not commands. They're mental events that arise and pass away, and you have the ability to observe them without being controlled by them. That's what I've been trying to do, picturing them as rocks and setting them down. That's actually a great technique. It's similar to cognitive diffusion, creating distance between yourself and your thoughts. Instead of "I am anxious," it becomes "I'm having the thought that I'm anxious." Do you see the difference? I think so. One makes it my identity. The other makes it just something passing through. Exactly. And when the voice told you to lay aside the mental weight, it was essentially giving you permission to stop treating every thought as if it requires your immediate attention and analysis, to recognize that you can observe thoughts without engaging with them. We spent the next 30 minutes discussing specific techniques. She taught me about thought records, where I could write down anxious thoughts and examine them objectively, about mindfulness exercises that would help me stay present instead of getting lost in mental analysis, about the difference between helpful problem-solving and unhelpful rumination. Here's something important to understand, Dr. Chen said, as our session was winding down. Your brain has been practicing overthinking for years. It's gotten really good at it. You're not going to undo that overnight. Learning to lay aside the mental weight is a practice, something you'll need to do consistently over time. Some days will be easier than others. Some days you'll feel like you've made no progress at all. That's normal. That's part of the process. But it will get better? It can get significantly better, yes. But Marcus, I want you to adjust your expectations slightly. The goal isn't to never have anxious thoughts again. The goal is to change your relationship with those thoughts, to see them as mental events rather than truths, to observe them without being controlled by them. That's what laying aside the weight really means. Not making the thoughts disappear, but learning not to carry them. After the session, I sat in my car for a long time, processing everything. I felt both lighter and heavier somehow. Lighter because someone had confirmed I wasn't crazy, that this was treatable, that there was hope. Heavier because I realized how much work was ahead of me, how long I'd been training my brain in these unhelpful patterns, how much unlearning I'd have to do. I pulled out my phone and texted Emma. First session done. It was good, hard, but good. Her response came quickly. Proud of you. Can't wait to hear about it. I drove home slowly, noticing things along the way. A jogger with a dog, children playing in a yard, an elderly couple walking hand in hand. Simple moments I usually rushed past, too caught up in my own head to notice the life happening around me. When I got home, Emma was making dinner while the kids did homework at the kitchen table. Lily was struggling with math, getting frustrated, on the edge of tears. Noah was coloring with intense concentration, his tongue sticking out the way it always did when he was focused. "How was it?" Emma asked as I hung up my coat. "Can we talk after the kids are in bed? I want to tell you everything, but I need to process it a bit more first." "Of course." I went to Lily, who was erasing her math problem for the third time. "Hey, sweetie, what's going on? I can't get this one. I keep getting the wrong answer and I don't know why, and Mrs. Henderson is going to think I'm stupid." My old instinct was to immediately help her solve the problem, to fix it, to make sure she got the right answer so she wouldn't feel bad. But I heard Dr. Chen's words. "Not every problem requires your immediate intervention." "Can I tell you something?" I said, sitting down beside her. "What?" "Mrs. Henderson isn't going to think you're stupid because you're struggling with one problem. Everyone struggles sometimes. That's how we learn. But what if I can't figure it out? Then you ask for help, which is what you're doing right now. That's not stupid, Lily. That's smart. Knowing when you need help is actually really intelligent." She looked at me with her big 6-year-old eyes, processing this. "Really? Really? Now, let's look at this problem together, and instead of me just giving you the answer, let's figure out where you're getting confused." We worked through it together, and when she finally got the right answer, her face lit up with pride. Not because I'd fixed it for her, but because she'd figured it out herself with support. "Thanks, Daddy," she said, hugging me tight. "Anytime, sweetheart." Noah looked up from his coloring. "Daddy, can you help me too?" "What do you need help with, buddy?" "Nothing. I just wanted you to sit with me." So I sat with him, not trying to improve his coloring or suggest better techniques, just being present while he colored dinosaurs in completely unrealistic colors. Purple T-Rexes and orange Brontosauruses and one blue Stegosaurus that he was particularly proud of. At dinner, we talked about our days. Emma told us about a difficult customer at the library where she worked. Lily described a game they played at recess. Noah explained in elaborate detail about a worm he'd found on the playground. I shared about my students' reactions to my talk about mental health, though I simplified it for the kids' understanding. "Why were you talking about being sad?" Noah asked. "Not sad exactly. More like worried. Sometimes people's brains worry too much about things, and it makes them feel heavy inside. I was telling them that it's okay to ask for help when that happens." "Do you worry too much, Daddy?" Lily asked. Emma and I exchanged glances. How honest should I be with a 6-year-old? "Sometimes I do," I said, "but I'm learning how to worry less. I'm learning to give my worries to God instead of carrying them all by myself." "How do you give worries to God?" she asked. "Do you mail them?" I smiled. "No, not mail. It's more like, you know how when you're carrying something too heavy and I help you carry it? It's like that, but with feelings and thoughts instead of physical things." "Oh, can God help me carry my heavy feelings too?" "Yes, sweetie, absolutely." After the kids were in bed, Emma and I sat on the couch with tea, and I told her everything about the therapy session, about Dr. Chen's explanation of rumination and metacognition, about the techniques she'd taught me, about how the work ahead was going to take time, but there was real hope for change. She said something that really stuck with me, I said. She said the goal isn't to make anxious thoughts disappear, but to change my relationship with them, to see them as mental events rather than truths. That's what laying aside the weight means. Not making the thoughts go away, but learning not to carry them. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. That makes sense. You can't control whether thoughts show up, but you can control whether you pick them up and carry them around. Exactly. But she also said it's going to take practice, lots of practice. My brain has been doing this for years, so it's not going to change overnight. That's okay. I'm not expecting overnight transformation. I'm just grateful you're doing the work. There's something else, I said. Dr. Chen asked if I wanted to explore the spiritual aspect of what happened, the voice I heard. She said she integrates faith-based approaches for clients who want that. Do you want that? I think I do. I mean, whether that voice was literally God or my unconscious mind or both, it felt spiritual. It felt like something beyond just psychology. And I want to understand that part too. Emma nodded. I think that's good. I've been thinking about it too, actually. About what it means that you had this experience. About whether maybe we should, I don't know, explore faith more intentionally as a family. You'd be open to that? I would. We've been going through the motions, church at Christmas and Easter, saying grace at dinner sometimes. But that's not really faith, is it? That's just tradition. And watching what's happening to you, seeing how real this is, it makes me wonder if maybe there's more to it than I've been willing to admit. We talked late into the night about faith and doubt, about what we believed and what we weren't sure about whether we could teach our kids about God when we were still figuring it out ourselves. It was the deepest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. Thursday at school, Emma Rodriguez stopped by my classroom after the final bell. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to tell you, my parents called that therapist you recommended. We're going for a consultation next week." "That's wonderful, Emma. I'm really glad. Thank you for talking to them, for helping them understand." She paused at the door. "And Mr. Carter, what you said Monday about how your brain is too loud sometimes. I've never heard a teacher talk about that before. It made me feel less alone." After she left, I sat at my desk, feeling that sense of purpose again, the sense that maybe my struggle wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about being able to help others who were struggling too. Maybe that was part of how God was using this, not just to heal me, but to help me understand others who were hurting in similar ways. My colleague, David Chen, knocked on my doorframe. "Hey, Marcus, got a minute?" "Sure. What's up?" He came in and closed the door, which was unusual. David and I were friendly, but not particularly close. He taught AP government and always seemed to have everything together. "I heard what you told your students on Monday about struggling with anxiety." "Oh, yeah. I hope that was okay. I know it wasn't exactly curriculum-based." "No, man. It was great. Actually, that's why I wanted to talk to you." He sat down in one of the student desks, looking uncomfortable. "I've been having panic attacks. Started about 6 months ago. Haven't told anyone except my wife. Been trying to just power through it, but it's getting worse." "David, I'm sorry. That's really hard. When you talked about getting help, about therapy, did it actually help, like after just one session? Do you feel any different?" "I feel hopeful, like there's a path forward, even if I can't see the whole thing yet. I'm not fixed, but I'm not drowning quite as badly." He nodded slowly. "Could you send me your therapist's info? I think I need to do something before this gets even worse." I sent him Dr. Chen's information, and after he left, I just sat there, amazed. 2 days ago, I'd been terrified to admit I was struggling. Now, I'd helped 2 people take steps toward getting help. Not because I had all the answers, but because I'd been willing to be honest about not having them. That evening, I had homework from Dr. Chen to write down my thoughts when I noticed myself starting to spiral, then examine them objectively. So I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Thought, I said something stupid in class today about the Treaty of Versailles, and the students probably think I'm an idiot. Evidence for, I stumbled over my words and had to correct myself. Evidence against, students often stumble over words when speaking. They asked good questions afterward which suggests they were engaged. No one actually said I was an idiot. More balanced thought, I made a small verbal mistake, but recovered well. This is normal and doesn't reflect on my competence as a teacher. It felt mechanical at first, forced. But as I worked through several thoughts, I started to see patterns. Most of my anxious thoughts were based on assumptions rather than evidence. Most of them involved mind reading, assuming I knew what others were thinking. Most of them were catastrophizing, taking small mistakes and imagining worst-case scenarios. Emma looked over my shoulder. "That looks tedious." "It is. But it's also kind of illuminating. Look at this. I was convinced my students thought I was an idiot because I corrected myself during a lecture. But when I actually look at the evidence, there's nothing to support that. It's just my brain making stuff up. Your brain is kind of mean to you." "It really is. I need to learn to be kinder to myself." That night, before bed, I prayed again. It was getting easier, less awkward. Like I was learning a language I'd heard spoken, but never practiced myself. "God, Thank you for Dr. Chen. Thank you for Emma Rodriguez's parents being willing to get her help. Thank you for David trusting me enough to ask for help. Thank you for showing me that maybe my struggle isn't just about me, that maybe you can use it to help others too. I'm starting to understand what you meant when you told me to lay aside the mental weight. You weren't promising to make the thoughts disappear. You were inviting me to stop carrying them alone, to change my relationship with them, to see them as just thoughts instead of truths. Help me keep practicing, keep learning, keep choosing to set down the rocks instead of clutching them, and help me be patient with myself when I fail, when I slip back into old patterns, when I forget and start carrying weight again. Thank you for not leaving me in that prison. Thank you for speaking to me. Thank you for starting something in me that I'm beginning to trust is real and lasting and transformative. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. I'm learning what that means, God. One thought, one moment, one choice at a time. I fell asleep that night with my hand in Emma's, my mind quieter than it had been in years, and the beginning of real hope taking root in my heart. 2 weeks had passed since that first therapy session, and I was learning that transformation was messier and slower than I'd hoped. Some days I felt like I was making real progress, actually learning to observe my thoughts without being controlled by them. Other days, I felt like I was right back where I started, drowning in the same mental weight I'd always carried. Dr. Chen had warned me about this. Healing isn't linear, she'd said in our second session. You'll have good days and setbacks. The key is to not treat the setbacks as failures, but as information. They teach you about your patterns, your triggers, the situations where you're most vulnerable to old habits. Today was a setback day. It started with an email from a parent. Mrs. Williams, mother of one of my students, Jackson. The email was polite but pointed, questioning why Jackson had received a B on his recent essay about the American Revolution. She suggested that perhaps I hadn't read it carefully enough, that Jackson had clearly met all the rubric requirements, and that she'd like to discuss this grading discrepancy at my earliest convenience. The old patterns kicked in immediately. My mind started spiraling. She thinks you're incompetent. She's right, you probably did miss something. What if you graded it wrong? What if other parents start questioning your grading? What if the principal gets involved? This could escalate. You need to defend yourself. No, wait, you need to apologize. But if you apologize, she'll think you admitted you were wrong. But if you defend yourself, she'll think you're arrogant. You can't win this. You've already lost. I sat at my desk during my planning period, the email open on my computer, my heart racing, that familiar tightness in my chest. The mental courtroom was in full session, prosecutor and defense attorney both arguing their cases while I sat in the defendant's chair, unable to speak in my own defense. And then I remembered, lay aside the mental weight. I closed my eyes and pictured each thought as a rock. She thinks you're incompetent. There's a rock. Set it down. What if other parents start questioning you? Another rock. Set it down. You can't win this. Rock. Down. But they kept coming back. As soon as I set one down, 2 more appeared. It was like trying to empty an ocean with a teaspoon. I pulled out my phone and texted Emma. Having a hard day. Old patterns coming back strong. Her response came within minutes. Remember what Dr. Chen said. Setbacks are information, not failure. You're learning. I love you. I texted back. Thank you. Love you too. I pulled out the notebook, Doctor. Chen had given me for thought records and started writing. Situation. Received email from parent questioning my grading. Automatic thoughts. She thinks I'm incompetent. I made a mistake. This will escalate. I can't handle this. Emotions. Anxiety, 810. Shame, 710. Panic, 610. Evidence for these thoughts. She did question my grading. She does seem dissatisfied. Evidence against one parent questioning one grade doesn't mean I'm incompetent. I've been teaching for 10 years with consistently good evaluations. She may just be advocating for her son, which is normal parent behavior. This probably won't escalate. Most grade discussions are resolved simply. Alternative thought: a parent is questioning a grade, which is her right. I can review Jackson's essay objectively, explain my reasoning, and we can have a professional conversation about it. This doesn't have to be a catastrophe. Writing it out helped. Not completely. The anxiety was still there, still pressing against my chest. But it was more manageable, less like drowning, more like swimming in rough water. Still hard, but survivable. I pulled up Jackson's essay and read it again, this time forcing myself to focus on what was actually there, rather than my fears about whether I'd graded it fairly. It was a good essay, well-researched, clearly written, solid analysis. But it didn't quite meet the excellent criteria for an A. The thesis could have been sharper. The conclusion was somewhat repetitive. It was solidly B work. I wrote a careful response to Mrs. Williams, explaining my reasoning, offering to meet to discuss it further, remaining professional and calm, even though inside I was still fighting the urge to spiral into catastrophic thinking. After I hit send, I sat back and took several deep breaths. You did it, I told myself. You didn't let the weight crush you. You acknowledged the thoughts, examined them, and chose a thoughtful response instead of reacting from anxiety. That's progress. But the victory felt small and fragile compared to how loud the anxious thoughts still were. At lunch, I sat with David Chen in the teacher's lounge. He'd had his first therapy session the week before and wanted to talk about it. "It's weird, right?" he said, unwrapping his sandwich. "Sitting in a room with a stranger and just talking about all the stuff in your head. Extremely weird, but also kind of helpful." "Yeah, my therapist, Dr. Morrison. He explained that my panic attacks are my body's threat response getting triggered when there's no actual threat, like my alarm system is broken and going off randomly. That's a good way to put it. He taught me this breathing technique. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. Sounds too simple to work, but when I actually do it during a panic attack, it helps. Not completely, but enough that I don't feel like I'm dying." "I'm glad you went. Glad you're getting help." David was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? I almost didn't go. I sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes, convincing myself I didn't really need it, that I was overreacting, that I should just tough it out. And then I remembered what you said to your students, that there's no shame in asking for help, so I went in. I'm proud of you, man. Thanks. And Marcus, thank you for being honest about your own struggle. If you hadn't said something, I'd probably still be suffering in silence, pretending everything was fine. After lunch, I had my junior history class. Emma Rodriguez was there, and she looked lighter somehow, less burdened. During class discussion about the civil rights movement, she raised her hand, something she rarely did. "Yes, Emma? I was just thinking about how Dr. King talked about the fierce urgency of now, how he said waiting wasn't an option because people were suffering, and I think that applies to mental health too, like we can't wait until we're completely broken to ask for help. The urgency is now." The class was silent for a moment, and then another student, Michael, spoke up. "That's real. I waited until I was having suicidal thoughts before I told anyone I was depressed, and that was almost too late. Like, if I'd asked for help earlier, I could have avoided a lot of pain." And then the class erupted, not in chaos, but in conversation. Students sharing their own experiences, their own struggles, supporting each other in ways I'd never seen in a history classroom before. I let it happen. Didn't redirect back to the lesson plan. Just facilitated as these 17-year-olds taught each other about vulnerability, courage, and the fierce urgency of not suffering in silence. When the bell rang and students filed out, several of them stopped to thank me, not for the history lesson, but for creating a space where they felt safe being honest. After school, I had my weekly session with Dr. Chen. I told her about the email from Mrs. Williams, about how hard I'd had to work to not spiral, about how the anxiety was still there, even after using all the techniques she'd taught me. "I'm doing everything right," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "I'm using the thought records. I'm practicing mindfulness. I'm setting down the rocks, but it still feels so heavy sometimes. Am I doing something wrong?" "Marcus, you're doing everything right. but I think you're still expecting the weight to disappear. Remember what we talked about. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety, it's to change your relationship with it. But when does it get easier? It is getting easier. You just can't see it yet because you're in the middle of it. 2 weeks ago, an email like that from a parent would have consumed your entire day, maybe your entire week. Today it was hard, but you worked through it in one period. That's significant progress. It doesn't feel like progress, I know. But Marcus, think about what you're doing. You're rewiring neural pathways that have been forming for decades. You're teaching your brain new ways of responding to perceived threats. That takes time. And yes, it's hard, but you're doing it. You're showing up, doing the work, practicing the skills, even when they don't feel like they're working. She paused, then said, "Can I share something with you? About that voice you heard. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it." And I think there's a deeper truth there that you're still learning. What do you mean? I think the message wasn't just about techniques or strategies for managing anxiety. I think it was about trust. About learning to trust that you don't have to control everything, predict everything, analyze everything, that there's something, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, that's holding you even when you can't feel it. But how do I trust that when my brain is screaming at me that I need to control everything? You practice, the same way you're practicing thought records and mindfulness. You practice trusting even when it feels impossible. You practice setting down the weight even when it feels scary. You practice believing that you're held even when you can't feel the hands holding you. That night at home, Emma had made spaghetti, the kids' favorite. Noah had sauce all over his face and was telling an elaborate story about a dragon who lived in the playground equipment at school. Lily was teaching us the multiplication table she'd learned that day, making us all answer her math questions. I was there. Actually there. Not perfectly, my mind still wandered occasionally to Mrs. Williams's email, to my therapy session, to everything I needed to do tomorrow. But when it wandered, I noticed, and I brought it back. And each time I brought it back, it got a little easier to stay present. After the kids were in bed, Emma and I sat in the living room with tea. She'd been quieter than usual all evening, and I could tell something was on her mind. "What's going on?" I asked. She took a breath. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about exploring faith more intentionally as a family. And I want to, but I'm also scared. Scared of what? Scared of doing it wrong. Scared of being a hypocrite, teaching our kids about God when I'm not even sure what I believe. Scared that we'll mess them up somehow by being uncertain. Emma, I think being uncertain and honest about it is better than being certain and fake. I'd rather our kids see us genuinely seeking and questioning than performing faith we don't actually feel. But how do we do that? How do we explore faith when we're both still figuring it out? I don't know. Maybe we start small. Maybe we start with honesty, telling the kids that we're learning too, that we believe there's something bigger than us, something that spoke to me that night, but we're still discovering what that means. She was quiet for a moment. There's a church down the street. I looked at their website. They have a Sunday school for kids, and they describe themselves as a community for seekers and doubters. Maybe we could try it. You want to go to church? I want to try. Not because I have it figured out, but because I think maybe the figuring out is meant to happen in community. And because when you talk about hearing from God, about laying aside the weight, there's something real there. Something I want to understand better. Okay, let's try it. This Sunday. This Sunday. Later that night, I sat in the quiet living room, the house dark except for the lamp beside the couch. I pulled out my journal and started writing, not thought records this time, but something more personal. A letter, maybe, or a prayer. I wasn't sure of the distinction anymore. God. 2 weeks ago, you told me to lay aside the mental weight, and I've been trying, I really have, but it's so much harder than I thought it would be. The weight keeps coming back, the thoughts keep spiraling, the anxiety keeps crushing me even when I'm doing everything right. Doctor, Jen says I'm making progress, but it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like I'm still drowning, just maybe drowning slightly less badly than before. But here's what I'm learning. Maybe the weight isn't supposed to disappear. Maybe the point isn't to never have anxious thoughts again. Maybe the point is exactly what Dr. Chen said, to learn to trust that you're carrying the weight even when I can't feel it, to trust that I'm held even when I can't see the hands holding me. And that's terrifying, because trust means not controlling. Trust means not predicting every outcome. Trust means sitting in uncertainty and believing that somehow, impossibly, it's going to be okay. I'm not good at that. I'm good at analyzing, at planning, at trying to think my way out of problems. But you're asking me to do something different. You're asking me to just be, to exist in this moment without trying to control the next one. Help me learn that. Help me trust that. Help me believe that laying aside the weight isn't giving up or being irresponsible. It's accepting that I was never meant to carry it alone in the first place. Tomorrow I'll wake up and probably have to start all over again. The thoughts will come. The weight will press down, and I'll have to choose, moment by moment, whether to pick it up or set it down, whether to analyze and spiral or observe and release, whether to trust or try to control. Give me strength for tomorrow's choices. Give me patience with myself when I fail. Give me hope that this slow, messy process is actually leading somewhere. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. I'm learning what that means. One thought at a time. One moment at a time. One choice at a time. I closed the journal and sat in the quiet, feeling the weight still there, still pressing, but somehow different. Not lighter exactly, but less mine. Like I was learning to let someone else help carry it. My phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Williams. Thank you for your detailed explanation. After rereading the rubric and Jackson's essay, I understand your reasoning. I appreciate your professionalism. I stared at the message, waiting for the rush of relief, the validation that I'd been right, the victory of surviving the interaction successfully. But what came instead was something quieter, simpler, just okay. It was okay. The situation resolved. The weight I'd been carrying about it could be set down now. I texted back, "Thank you for reaching out. Jackson is a good student and I'm glad we could discuss this." And then I put my phone down and let it be done. Didn't analyze the exchange, didn't replay it in my mind looking for mistakes, didn't catastrophize about future interactions, just let it be finished. Small victory, tiny really, but real. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm again. Not from anxiety this time, but from actual rest. Emma was still sleeping, her hand resting on my chest, and I just lay there for a moment, feeling the weight of her hand, the rhythm of her breathing, the quiet of the morning. My mind tried to start its usual routine, analyzing yesterday, planning today, worrying about tomorrow, but I caught it earlier this time, noticed the thoughts arising, pictured them as rocks, set them down before they could multiply, and then I just was. Existing in this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this quiet morning with my wife beside me and my children sleeping safely in their rooms, and a whole day ahead that I didn't have to control or predict or analyze. Just this moment, just this breath, just laying aside the weight, over and over, until maybe someday it would stay down without me having to keep picking it up. Emma stirred and opened her eyes. "Morning. Morning. You look peaceful." "I'm trying to be. How's it going?" "Moment by moment. Some moments better than others." She smiled and kissed me softly. That's all any of us can do. We lay there together for a few more minutes, and I practiced being present with her. Not thinking about what we needed to do today, or analyzing whether I was being present enough, or worrying about whether she could tell I was trying. Just being with her in this moment, in this quiet morning, in this life we were learning to actually live instead of constantly preparing for. The weight was still there. It probably always would be, to some degree, but I was learning that I didn't have to carry it alone, that there were hands, God's hands, Emma's hands, Dr. Chen's hands, my own hands, learning new skills, helping me carry it. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. Not a promise that the weight would disappear, a promise that I didn't have to bear it alone. And slowly, gradually, one moment at a time, I was learning to trust that promise, to believe it was real, to live as if it were true. Sunday morning arrived with a mixture of nervousness and hope. Emma and I had told the kids we were going to church, and their reactions were predictably different. Lily was excited. She loved anything that involved meeting new people and doing new things. Noah was skeptical, asking multiple questions about whether there would be snacks and if he'd have to sit still the whole time. "There will probably be snacks," Emma assured him. "And you'll be in a class with other kids your age, so you won't have to sit with us." "Will they teach us about Jesus?" Lily asked. "Probably," I said. "Do you believe in Jesus, Daddy?" The question stopped me. How did I answer that honestly? A month ago, I would have said I didn't know, that religion wasn't really my thing, that I believed in being a good person but wasn't sure about the supernatural stuff. But now, after hearing that voice, after experiencing something I couldn't explain or rationalize away, "I'm learning to," I said finally. "I believe there's something bigger than us, someone who cares about us, and I'm trying to understand what that means." "That's a good answer," Emma said quietly, squeezing my hand. The church was small, housed in a building that had clearly been something else before, maybe a community center or a school. Nothing fancy, nothing polished. Just a simple space with chairs instead of pews, a small stage with a few musicians setting up, and people milling around with coffee and conversation. We were immediately greeted by a woman in her 60s with warm eyes and a genuine smile. "Welcome, I'm Patricia. Are you visiting with us today?" "Yes," Emma said. "First time. We saw on your website that you're a community for seekers and doubters, and that resonated with us." Patricia laughed. "Well, you've come to the right place. We're all figuring this out together. Let me show you where the kids' classes are, and then I'll introduce you to Pastor Mike." She walked us to the children's area, where Lily and Noah were quickly absorbed into groups of other kids their ages. The teachers seemed kind and engaging, and I felt my anxiety about leaving them ease slightly. Patricia then introduced us to Pastor Mike, a man in his 40s wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, no tie, no formal robes or religious regalia. "Marcus and Emma, right?" he said, shaking our hands. "Patricia mentioned you're seekers and doubters. Perfect. So am I." "You're the pastor, and you're a doubter?" I asked. "Absolutely. I think doubt is essential to genuine faith. Certainty is easy. Trust in the midst of uncertainty, that's where real faith lives." He smiled. "But we can talk more about that after the service if you're interested. For now, make yourselves comfortable. Grab coffee. The service starts in about 10 minutes, and I promise it's not what you're probably expecting from church." He was right. The service wasn't what I expected. It started with music, not hymns from 100 years ago, but contemporary songs with lyrics projected on a screen. Some people sang enthusiastically, hands raised, others just listened. No one seemed to judge either approach. Pastor Mike's message was about the story of Peter walking on water, how Jesus called him to step out of the boat, how Peter actually walked on water for a moment before his fear took over and he started to sink, how Jesus reached out and caught him. "Here's what I think this story is really about," Pastor Mike said. "It's not about whether you can walk on water, it's about what happens when you try and start to sink, because Peter did sink. His faith faltered, his fear took over. And in that moment, Jesus didn't lecture him about his lack of faith or abandon him to drown. Jesus reached out and caught him." He paused, letting that sink in. How many of you are sinking right now? How many of you stepped out in faith towards something, a new job, a relationship, a dream, a healing journey, and you're drowning? You're going under, and you're terrified that you failed, that God is disappointed, that you should have stayed in the boat where it was safe. I felt Emma's hand find mine. Here's what I want you to hear today. Jesus catches sinkers. That's his specialty. Not people who have perfect faith and never falter. People who try, who step out, who start to sink, and who cry out for help. That's who Jesus is drawn to. That's who Jesus saves. My throat tightened. I was sinking. I'd stepped out, trusted that voice, started therapy, tried to change my relationship with my thoughts, opened up to Emma and my students, and I was still sinking sometimes, still drowning in anxiety on the hard days, still overwhelmed by the weight. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the sinking wasn't failure. Maybe it was just part of learning to walk on water. After the service, Pastor Mike found us. "What did you think?" he asked. "It was different than I expected," I said, "in a good way. I'm glad. Can I ask what brought you here? Patricia mentioned you're seekers, but everyone's seeking something specific." I looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "I heard a voice 3 weeks ago," I said. I was drowning in anxiety and mental weight I couldn't seem to set down, and I heard a voice tell me to lay aside the mental weight, that it would carry it for me. And I'm trying to figure out what that means, who spoke to me, how to actually do what I was told to do. Pastor Mike's expression shifted to something deeper. "That's a powerful experience. How has it been since then?" "Hard. I'm in therapy, I'm learning techniques, I'm trying to change patterns I've had for years. But I'm still sinking sometimes, still overwhelmed, and I guess I came here hoping to understand why God would speak to me and then let me keep struggling." "Can I tell you something?" Pastor Mike said. "God speaking to you wasn't a magic wand that would make your struggles disappear. It was an invitation to trust, to learn, to be in relationship, and relationship requires participation from both sides. God said, 'I will carry it, but you have to practice the laying aside part.' That's your work, your practice, your daily choice, but it's so hard. Of course it is. You're unlearning decades of neural pathways. You're changing fundamental patterns of how you relate to your own mind. That's not a light switch, it's a journey. And God isn't disappointed that it's hard or that you're still struggling. God is right there in the struggle with you, catching you every time you start to sink." We talked for another 20 minutes. Pastor Mike told us about his own journey with depression, about how he'd had to learn that being a pastor didn't mean having it all figured out, about how his struggles had made him a better minister, because he could relate to people's pain instead of just preaching at them from a place of supposed spiritual superiority. "Would you be interested in joining a small group?" he asked. "We have one that meets Tuesday evenings specifically for people wrestling with mental health and faith. It's a safe space, to be honest, to doubt, to struggle, to support each other." "I think I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. "Me too," Emma added. We picked up the kids, who were full of stories about their classes. Lily had learned about Moses and the burning bush. Noah had made a craft about being kind to others. On the drive home, I felt lighter somehow. Not because my anxiety had disappeared, but because I'd found a community of people who understood that faith and struggle could coexist, that sinking didn't mean failing. That afternoon, while the kids played in the backyard, Emma and I sat on the back porch with coffee. "I liked it," she said. "The church, Pastor Mike, the whole thing felt real, not performative." "Yeah, and what he said about Jesus catching sinkers, that landed hard for me." "Me too. I think I've been sinking too, in my own way. Sinking under the weight of trying to hold our family together while you were struggling. Sinking under the fear that I was losing you. And I've been trying to swim on my own instead of calling out for help. You don't have to do that anymore. We can sink and be caught together." She laughed through tears. "That's either really profound or really morbid. Maybe both." Monday at school I felt different. Not dramatically transformed, but incrementally more grounded. The anxiety was still there. It flared up when I checked my email, when I planned my lessons, when I thought about the upcoming parent-teacher conferences. But I was getting better at noticing it without being consumed by it, at observing the thoughts without necessarily believing them. During my planning period, I got an email from Emma Rodriguez's mother. My heart rate immediately spiked. Another parent email, another potential conflict, another opportunity to spiral into catastrophic thinking. But then I stopped, took a breath, pictured the anxiety as a rock, set it down, and opened the email. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to thank you for talking to us about Emma getting help. She had her first therapy session last week and it went well. She's already seeming lighter, more hopeful. Thank you for caring enough about your students to have those difficult conversations. You made a real difference for our family." I read it twice, letting the words sink in, not analyzing them for hidden meanings or worrying about how to respond perfectly, just receiving them as what they were. Gratitude, acknowledgement, confirmation that being vulnerable had mattered. I wrote back, "I'm so glad Emma is getting the support she needs. She's a wonderful student and deserves to feel well. Thank you for trusting me enough to have that conversation." Simple, honest, no overthinking required. At lunch, David Chen found me in my classroom. "Hey, I wanted to tell you something. I talked to my students about my panic attacks, like you did with yours, and 3 of them came to me afterward saying they were struggling too. One of them told me he'd been thinking about suicide but was too scared to tell anyone. I got him connected with the school counselor, and his parents are getting him help." David, that's huge. "It is, and it happened because you were brave enough to be honest first. You showed me it was possible, and now that kid might be alive because of the ripple effect of your honesty." After he left, I sat at my desk feeling the weight of that. Not the mental weight I usually carried, the analyzing, the worrying, the catastrophizing, but a different kind of weight. The weight of responsibility, of impact, of recognizing that my struggle wasn't just about me. That evening, I had my session with Dr. Chen. I told her about the church service, about Pastor Mike's message, about the small group Emma and I were going to join. "How do you feel about integrating faith into your healing process?" she asked. "Good, uncertain, but good. I think I've been trying to keep the spiritual experience separate from the therapeutic work, but maybe they're meant to work together. I think you're right, and I'm glad you're finding community. Healing doesn't happen in isolation. We need people, therapists, friends, faith communities, family, all helping us carry the weight we're learning to set down. Can I ask you something? You mentioned you do faith-based counseling. Do you believe God actually speaks to people, like literally speaks?" She considered the question carefully. "I believe something beyond our understanding can communicate with us. Whether you call that God, divine presence, universal consciousness, or something else, I've seen too many people have experiences like yours to dismiss them as purely psychological. And what matters isn't whether we can prove it happened, but whether it's helping you heal. It is. Even on the hard days when I feel like I'm not making progress, remembering those words, lay aside the mental weight, I will carry it. It gives me hope. It reminds me I'm not alone in this. Then it's real. Maybe not in a way that can be measured or scientifically verified, but real in the way that matters most. It's changing your life." We spent the rest of the session working on advanced mindfulness techniques. She taught me about RAIN: recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. When anxiety arose, I was to recognize what I was feeling, allow it to be there without fighting it, investigate where in my body I felt it and what thoughts were attached to it, and then nurture myself with the same kindness I'd show a friend. The nurture part is what most people skip, Dr. Chen said. We're good at recognizing our anxiety. Some people get decent at allowing it, but we rarely nurture ourselves through it. We berate ourselves for being anxious instead of offering ourselves compassion. What does nurturing look like? It looks like putting your hand on your heart and saying, "This is really hard right now, and that's okay. You're doing your best. You're not alone." It looks like treating yourself like you'd treat your kids when they're scared or struggling, with gentleness, with reassurance, with love. That night, after the kids were in bed, I practiced it. I sat quietly, noticed the anxiety that was still humming in the background, worries about tomorrow, replaying today's interactions, analyzing whether I'd said the right things. And instead of trying to push it away or analyze it or fix it, I put my hand on my heart. "This is really hard," I said out loud softly. "Learning to live differently is really hard. And that's okay. You're doing your best. You're not alone." It felt strange, almost embarrassing, even though no one could hear me. But it also felt kind, gentle, like I was finally offering myself the same grace I tried to offer others. Emma found me sitting there and sat down beside me without saying anything. Just sat with me in the quiet, her presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. "I love you," she said finally. "I love you too. You're different, you know, than you were a month ago. Better different or just different. Better, softer, more present. Still struggling, but struggling in a way that's visible instead of hidden. Struggling with us instead of alone. Is that enough? The struggling with you part? It's everything. I don't need you to be perfect, Marcus. I need you to be present. And you're learning to be present even when it's hard. That's all I ever wanted." Tuesday evening, we went to our first small group meeting at the church. It was held in Pastor Mike's living room. Just 6 people, including us, sitting in a circle with coffee and snacks. Pastor Mike introduced everyone. There was Jennifer, in her 30s, who struggled with OCD and was learning to manage intrusive thoughts. Carlos, in his 50s, dealing with depression following a job loss. Amy and Tom, a couple in their 40s, navigating Amy's bipolar disorder, and us. "The only rule here," Pastor Mike said, "is honesty. You can share as much or as little as you're comfortable with, but what you share needs to be true. No performing, no pretending you're fine when you're not. This is a space for real struggle and real faith to coexist." We went around the circle sharing our stories. When it was my turn, I told them about the voice I'd heard, about the mental weight I'd been carrying, about learning to set it down moment by moment. "Some days I feel like I'm making progress," I said. "Other days I feel like I'm right back where I started, and I keep wondering if I'm doing it wrong, if I'm not faithful enough, if God is disappointed that I'm still struggling." "God isn't disappointed," Jennifer said. "Trust me. I've had that same thought 1,000 times, but I had a therapist tell me once that God isn't grading us. God is growing us. And growth is messy and non-linear and often looks like failure before it looks like progress." "That's good," I said. "God is growing us, not grading us. I need to remember that." Carlos spoke next. "I lost my job 6 months ago. Engineering position I'd held for 20 years, and I spiraled into the worst depression of my life. Couldn't get out of bed, couldn't see any future, couldn't feel anything except this crushing weight of worthlessness. And I prayed, begged God to take it away, to fix me, to make me feel better. But he didn't." "What happened?" Emma asked. "I'm still depressed. I'm on medication now, in therapy, doing the work, but I'm still depressed. And I was angry at God for a long time about that, felt abandoned, felt like my prayers weren't being answered. But then Pastor Mike said something that changed my perspective. He said sometimes God's answer isn't to remove the struggle, but to be present in it with us, to carry us through it instead of around it. "That's what the voice told me," I said. "I will carry it, not I will remove it. I will carry it." "Exactly," Carlos said, "and I'm learning that being carried through depression looks different than being cured of it. It looks like having support, having medication that helps, having a community that shows up even when I can't. It looks like God using other people's hands to hold me up." We talked for 2 hours about mental health and medication and therapy and prayer, about how faith and psychology weren't enemies but partners in healing, about how vulnerability was strength, not weakness, about how we were all sinkers, learning to trust that we'd be caught. When Emma and I drove home that night, we were both quiet, processing. "I think we found our people," Emma said finally. "Yeah, I think we did." "Marcus, can I tell you something? Being in that group, hearing their stories, watching you be honest about your struggle, I think I'm starting to understand what faith actually is. It's not about having all the answers or never doubting or being perfect. It's about showing up honestly and trusting that you're not alone. That's exactly it. That's what lay aside the mental weight really means. Not that the weight disappears, but that I don't have to carry it alone." That night, I prayed differently than I had before, not asking for the anxiety to go away, not begging to be fixed, just offering gratitude. God, thank you for the small group. Thank you for Carlos and Jennifer and Amy and Tom and Pastor Mike. Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone in this struggle, that sinking doesn't mean failing, that being carried through is just as miraculous as being cured. Thank you for Dr. Chen and Emma and my students and everyone who's helping me learn to lay aside the weight. Thank you for patience with my slow progress, for grace in my setbacks, for presence in my struggling. I'm learning that healing isn't about becoming someone who never has anxious thoughts. It's about becoming someone who knows what to do with them when they come, someone who can observe them, investigate them, and then nurture himself through them, instead of being destroyed by them. Lay aside the mental weight, I will carry it. I'm learning, God, slowly, imperfectly, but truly learning, and that's enough for tonight. I fell asleep with less weight than I'd woken up with, not because the thoughts were gone, but because I'd practiced over and over throughout the day, setting them down and trusting they'd be carried. One thought at a time, one moment at a time, one choice at a time, learning to live lighter. A month had passed since I first heard those 7 words. 4 weeks of therapy sessions, small group meetings, practicing mindfulness, learning to observe my thoughts instead of being controlled by them. 4 weeks of incremental progress mixed with frustrating setbacks. 4 weeks of learning that healing was indeed not linear, just as Dr. Chen had promised. I was sitting in my classroom during my planning period, grading essays about the Great Depression, when I noticed something strange. I'd been working for 20 minutes without once spiraling into anxious thoughts about whether I was grading fairly, whether my students would question my judgment, whether I was good enough at my job. 20 minutes of just working, being present with the task in front of me instead of lost in my head. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. I texted Emma. Just realized I went 20 minutes without overthinking. Progress? Her response came quickly. Huge progress, proud of you. The thing about recovery, and I was starting to accept that's what this was, recovery from decades of unhealthy mental patterns, was that you didn't notice it happening in the moment. You only noticed it in retrospect when you suddenly realized you'd done something that would have been impossible a month ago, like the parent-teacher conferences that evening. The old me would have been preparing for days, scripting out potential conversations, anticipating every possible question or concern, building elaborate mental defenses against criticism. The new me, the one slowly emerging from all this work, had prepared normally, professionally, but without the paralyzing anxiety. The conferences went smoothly. Most parents were supportive, asking good questions, expressing appreciation for my teaching. One mother did express concern about her daughter's grade, but instead of spiraling, I calmly explained my reasoning, offered additional support resources, and ended the conversation feeling like we'd had a productive discussion rather than a confrontation. After the last parent left, I sat at my desk and just breathed. Noticed that my shoulders weren't up by my ears. Noticed that the tightness in my chest wasn't there. Noticed that I felt okay. Not ecstatic, not perfectly calm, but okay. And okay was better than I'd felt in years. David Chen knocked on my doorframe. Hey, how'd your conferences go? Good. Really good, actually. No spiraling, no catastrophic thinking, just normal professional conversations. That's huge, man. Mine went well, too. I used that breathing technique Dr. Morrison taught me when I started feeling a panic attack coming on during one difficult conversation. It actually worked. We're both getting better. We are. Slowly. But yeah. He paused. Can I ask you something? Do you ever feel guilty about it? About getting better? What do you mean? Like, I've been the anxious guy for so long. My wife knows me as the anxious guy. My colleagues, my friends, everyone knows me as the person who worries about everything. And as I'm getting better, I feel this weird guilt like I'm letting down some identity I've built. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. I'd been thinking about the same thing. Yeah, I think part of me got comfortable with the anxiety because at least it was familiar. At least I knew how to be anxious. Learning to be not anxious feels like becoming a different person, and that's scary, even when it's good. Exactly. My therapist says it's normal, that we have to grieve the old self, even when the old self was unhealthy. That becoming healthier means letting go of patterns and identities that no longer serve us, and that loss is real even when it's necessary. We talked for a while longer about the strange grief of getting better, about how healing required letting go of familiar coping mechanisms, even when they felt like core parts of our personalities. It was a conversation I couldn't have had a month ago, too vulnerable, too honest, too risky. But now it felt natural, necessary. That evening at home, Lily had a meltdown about her homework. She'd been working on a project about families and had drawn a picture of our family, but then decided it wasn't good enough and wanted to start over. She was crying, frustrated, on the edge of giving up entirely. The old me would have jumped in to fix it, would have reassured her it was fine, or helped her start over perfectly, or analyzed why she was having such a strong reaction. But I'd been learning about tolerance for distress, both my own and others, and how sometimes the kindest thing you can do is sit with someone in their struggle instead of trying to rescue them from it. So I sat down on the floor next to her. "This is really hard, huh? I wanted it to be perfect, and it's not perfect, and now it's ruined. It's so frustrating when something doesn't turn out the way you imagined it. I hate it." She crumpled up the paper. "Okay, you're allowed to hate it, and you're allowed to be upset about it. Want me to just sit here with you while you feel upset?" She looked at me, surprised. Usually I try to make everything better immediately. "You're not going to tell me it's not that bad?" "Nope. If you think it's bad, then it feels bad to you, and your feelings are real and valid." She leaned against me, and we sat there in her frustration for a few minutes, not trying to fix it, not trying to make her feel better, just being present with her in the hard moment. Eventually she took a breath. "Maybe I could try again tomorrow, when I'm not so frustrated." "That sounds like a good plan. Thanks for sitting with me, Daddy." "Any time, sweetheart." After she went to bed, Emma came and sat next to me on the couch. "That was good, what you did with Lily. Sitting with her instead of fixing. I'm learning. From Dr. Chen, from the small group, from watching how you parent. Learning that being present with struggle is sometimes better than trying to eliminate it." "Speaking of the small group," Emma said, "I've been thinking about something Jennifer said last week. About how her OCD makes her have intrusive thoughts about hurting people she loves, and how she's had to learn that thoughts aren't actions. That thinking something doesn't make it true or real or predictive." Yeah, that really stuck with me too. I think I need to apply that to my own thoughts. I have intrusive thoughts about you relapsing, about you going back to being completely in your head, completely unavailable. And I've been treating those thoughts like predictions. Like if I think it, it must be true or inevitable. But they're just thoughts, just my anxiety about losing you again. Are you still afraid of that? Of losing me? Sometimes. Not as much as before. But the fear is still there. And I'm learning that I can notice the fear without letting it control how I relate to you. I can observe the thought, "He's going to relapse," without believing it or acting on it. That's exactly what I'm learning to do with my anxious thoughts. Notice them, examine them, but not necessarily believe them. So we're both learning the same skill, just applied to different anxieties. I guess so. Maybe that's part of what laying aside the mental weight means for a family. We all have to learn to carry our thoughts more lightly. Wednesday afternoon, I had my session with Dr. Chen. I told her about the conferences, about the moment I'd realized I'd gone 20 minutes without overthinking, about the conversation with David. "Those are significant markers of progress," she said. "You're experiencing longer periods of being present, of not being hijacked by anxious thoughts. How does that feel?" "Good. Strange. Sometimes I almost miss the anxiety because at least I knew what to do with it. This new way of being feels unfamiliar." "That's very common. We get attached to our suffering because it's predictable. Health, wellness, peace, those can feel more threatening than the familiar pain because we don't know how to navigate them. How do I navigate them? The same way you navigate anxiety, with curiosity, with observation, with self-compassion. When you notice yourself feeling good, resist the urge to analyze it or question whether it's real. Just let yourself feel good. Practice enjoying moments of peace instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop. We spent the rest of the session working on future-oriented anxiety. Dr. Chen explained that much of my mental weight came from trying to predict and control future events, and that learning to stay present required actively choosing not to engage with those future-focused thoughts. When you notice your mind going to what-if scenarios, she said, I want you to practice coming back to what is. What if I mess up this lesson becomes what is happening right now? I'm planning a lesson. What if that parent gets angry with me becomes what is happening right now? I'm having a thought about a possible future scenario. See the difference? What is keeps me in reality? What if takes me into speculation? Exactly. And you can't control speculation. You can only be present with reality. That evening was our small group meeting. We were reading a book together about faith and mental health, and this week's chapter was about the relationship between surrender and action. I struggle with this, Amy said. My therapist tells me I need to be active in managing my bipolar disorder, taking medication, monitoring my moods, practicing self-care. But then people at church tell me I need to surrender it to God, to have faith that He'll heal me. And those two messages feel contradictory. Pastor Mike leaned forward. Here's what I think, and this is just my perspective, not capital T truth. I think surrender and action aren't contradictory. Surrender isn't passivity. It's active trust. It's saying, God, I'm going to do everything I can to manage this condition, and I'm trusting that you're working through my efforts, through my medication, through my therapy, through my community. I'm surrendering the outcome while taking responsibility for the process. So it's both and, not either or, Tom said. Exactly. Marcus, you heard God tell you to lay aside the mental weight, but you didn't just sit there waiting for it to magically disappear. You started therapy, you learned techniques, you practiced mindfulness, you joined a community, you took action while trusting that God was working through those actions. That's true, I said. I guess I've been doing both without realizing it. Surrendering the outcome, whether I'll be healed completely, how long it will take, what the end result will look like, while taking responsibility for showing up to therapy, practicing the skills, doing the work. Jennifer nodded. That's what I do with OCD. I can't control whether intrusive thoughts appear, but I can control how I respond to them. I surrender the thoughts themselves to God, acknowledge that they're there, that I can't make them disappear through willpower, while taking action through exposure therapy, through challenging the thoughts, through not engaging in compulsive behaviors. Carlos spoke up. And with my depression, I can't just positive think my way out of it or pray it away. But I can take my medication, go to therapy, reach out for support when I'm sinking, and trust that God is working through all those things even when I can't feel His presence. The conversation continued for another hour, all of us wrestling with this paradox of surrender and action, of trusting God while taking responsibility, of accepting our limitations while still trying to grow and heal. On the drive home, Emma was quiet, processing. What are you thinking about? I asked. About surrender, about how I've been trying to control your healing instead of trusting it, trying to monitor your progress, evaluate whether you're getting better fast enough, worrying about whether the changes are permanent. And I think I need to surrender that, to trust that you're doing your work, that God is working in you, and that the outcome isn't mine to control. That's huge. It is. And it's scary, because surrendering feels like giving up. But I'm learning that it's actually the opposite. Surrendering is how we stop exhausting ourselves, trying to control things we were never meant to control. When we got home, both kids were already asleep. Emma's mother had watched them during the group meeting. We sat on the couch together, and Emma pulled out her phone. I want to show you something. I've been keeping a journal like you have, writing down my thoughts and examining them. And I wrote something today that I want to share with you. She handed me her phone, and I read, thought, Marcus is going to relapse and become unavailable again. Evidence for he's had setbacks before. Change is hard. What if this is temporary? Evidence against he's been consistently working on himself for a month. He's in therapy. He's actively engaged with the small group. He's present with the kids in ways he hasn't been in years. He's different not just in behavior, but in how he talks about his thoughts and struggles. Alternative thought. Marcus might have setbacks. That's normal in recovery. But setbacks don't mean relapse. He has tools now. He has support. He has awareness. And even if he does struggle, we'll face it together instead of him facing it alone in his head. Self-compassion. It's understandable that I'm scared of losing the progress we've made. But this fear isn't serving me. I can acknowledge it, observe it, and choose to trust anyway. I looked up at her, tears in my eyes. Emma, this is beautiful. You've been doing the work too. I have. Because I realized that my anxiety about your anxiety was creating its own weight, and I needed to learn to lay it aside too. We held each other on the couch, both of us learning the same lessons in different ways, both of us carrying each other through our own individual sinking moments. That night I prayed with a depth of gratitude I hadn't felt before. God, a month ago, you spoke to me, told me to lay aside the mental weight, and I'm learning what that means in ways I never expected. It means doing the work while trusting the outcome. It means taking action while surrendering control. It means showing up to therapy and small group and hard conversations while believing that you're working through all of it. It means letting Emma carry some of the weight too, letting my community help, letting professionals guide me, accepting that I don't have to do this alone, or perfectly, or quickly. Thank you for the progress that's happening so slowly, I barely notice it until I look back and see how far I've come. Thank you for the setbacks that teach me about my patterns and triggers. Thank you for the community that reminds me I'm not alone. Thank you for Emma, who's doing her own work, facing her own fears, learning to surrender her own control. Thank you for my kids, who are teaching me about presence and sitting with struggle and offering compassion. I'm learning that laying aside the mental weight isn't a one-time event. It's a daily practice, a moment-by-moment choice, a continual surrender of my need to control, predict and analyze everything. Some days I'm better at it than others. Some days I pick up the weight again and have to consciously set it back down. Some days I forget entirely and end up drowning before I remember there's another way. But I'm learning. Slowly, imperfectly, but truly learning, and you're carrying what I can't carry. You're working through my therapy and my medication and my community and my effort. You're present in my setbacks and my progress, in my sinking and my being caught. Lay aside the mental weight, I will carry it. I'm learning to trust that promise, to live as if it's true, to surrender while taking action, to accept help while doing the work. Thank you for not giving up on me when I sink. Thank you for catching me every time. Thank you for inviting me into this healing journey and then walking it with me step by step. I closed my journal and sat in the quiet, feeling lighter than I had when the day began. Not because the weight had disappeared, but because I'd practiced, over and over, the choosing to set it down. And each time I chose to set it down, it got a little easier to leave it there. Not effortless, not automatic, but easier, and that was progress worth celebrating. 6 weeks had passed since I heard that voice. 6 weeks of therapy, small group meetings, practicing presence, learning to observe my thoughts without being controlled by them. 6 weeks of what Dr. Chen called rewiring my brain, a process that sounded simple in theory, but was proving to be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I was in the middle of teaching a lesson on the New Deal when it happened. One of my students, Brandon, a quiet kid who usually kept to himself, raised his hand. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you something that's not about history?" "Sure, Brandon. You said a few weeks ago that you struggle with anxiety, and I was wondering, How do you know if your anxiety is bad enough that you need help? Like, when does normal worry become something you should talk to someone about? The class went quiet. Every student was suddenly paying attention in a way they rarely did during actual history lessons. I could have deflected, could have given a generic answer about how everyone's different and you should talk to a trusted adult. But these kids had shown me they needed honesty more than platitudes. That's a really important question, I said, setting down my marker. Here's how I figured it out for me. When the anxiety started controlling my life, instead of me controlling the anxiety. When I couldn't be present with my family because I was always in my head. When I couldn't sleep because my mind wouldn't stop analyzing everything I'd said that day. When physical symptoms started appearing, headaches, chest tightness, stomach problems. Brandon nodded slowly. That's kind of what's happening to me. I can't stop worrying about college applications, about whether I'm good enough, about whether I'm going to fail at life. And it's like, I know it's probably not rational, but I can't stop. That was exactly my experience. And here's what I learned. You don't wait until you're completely broken to ask for help. The best time to get help is when you first notice the anxiety is taking over before it gets worse. There's no shame in it, Brandon. It's actually the smartest thing you can do. After class, Brandon stayed behind. Mr. Carter, would you tell me how you found your therapist? I think I need to talk to someone, but I don't know where to start. I gave him Dr. Chen's information, along with some other resources for teen counseling. As he left, another student, Maria, who'd been lingering by the door, approached. Mr. Carter, I started seeing a therapist because of what you said, about how asking for help isn't weakness, and it's helping. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm really glad, Maria. Proud of you for taking that step. Can I tell you something else? My parents were against it at first. They thought therapy was for crazy people. But I showed them that article you posted about mental health, and it helped them understand. So thank you for that too. After she left, I sat at my desk, feeling the weight of what was happening. Not the mental weight I'd been learning to set down, but a different kind of weight, the responsibility of influence, of recognizing that my honesty was creating ripples I couldn't control or predict. I texted Emma. 3 more students asked about therapy today. I think I accidentally started a mental health movement in my classroom. Her response, not accidental. This is what happens when people are brave enough to be honest. Proud of you. That afternoon, my principal, Mr. Patterson, called me into his office. My old patterns immediately kicked in. What did I do wrong? Am I in trouble? Did a parent complain? But I caught myself, noticed the thoughts, pictured them as rocks, set them down. Marcus, come in, sit down, Mr. Patterson said. He looked serious, which did nothing to calm my lingering anxiety. I've been hearing from parents, he began, and my heart rate spiked. Several parents have reached out to me about conversations their kids have had with you about mental health. Here it comes, I thought. You overstepped. You shouldn't have been so open. You're going to get reprimanded. And I want to thank you, he continued. These parents are grateful. Their kids are getting help they've needed for years because you were willing to be vulnerable about your own struggles. One mother told me her son, who'd been hiding his anxiety for years, finally felt safe enough to ask for help after hearing you talk about it in class. I exhaled slowly. Oh, I was worried I'd crossed a line. No. You found a line we should have crossed years ago. We do a good job teaching academic subjects, but we rarely teach kids how to handle the mental and emotional struggles that come with being human. You've opened a door that needed to be opened. He leaned forward. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in doing something more formal, maybe a monthly mental health awareness assembly or a peer support group for students. I know you're already doing a lot with your own healing, so no pressure, but if you're interested, the school would support it. Can I think about it? Of course, take your time. Walking out of his office, I felt simultaneously honored and overwhelmed. This was more than I'd bargained for when I'd simply been honest with my students about my struggle, but maybe that's how healing worked. It started personal and then became communal, spreading in ways you couldn't predict or control. That evening was our small group meeting. Pastor Mike had asked us to come prepared to share about a moment when we felt God's presence during our struggles with mental health. When it was my turn, I shared about the parent-teacher conference where I'd expected to spiral but didn't. I remember sitting there explaining a grade to a mother who was questioning my judgment, and I felt this calm, this ability to just be present in the conversation instead of drowning in anxiety about it. And in that moment I thought, this is what it means to have God carry the weight. Not that the situation disappeared, but that I had what I needed to handle it. Jennifer shared about a particularly bad day with her OCD, when the intrusive thoughts were overwhelming. I was sitting in my car trying to talk myself down, and my phone buzzed. It was a text from Amy. She'd just randomly thought of me and wanted to check in. She had no idea I was struggling in that moment, but God knew, and He used her to remind me I wasn't alone. Carlos talked about his medication finally finding the right balance after months of adjustments. I kept wondering why God wasn't just healing my depression miraculously. And then I realized maybe the miracle is the medication. Maybe God works through psychiatry and chemistry just as much as through prayer and faith. Amy nodded. When I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I was devastated. I felt broken, defective, like God had made a mistake with me. But my therapist said something that changed my perspective. She said, "You're not broken. Your brain just works differently, and that's okay. God made you this way, and God is walking with you through learning to manage it." That was 5 years ago, and I still remind myself of it when I'm struggling. The conversation shifted to the intersection of medication and faith, a topic that seemed to carry a lot of weight for everyone in the room. "I think the church has failed people with mental illness," Pastor Mike said bluntly. "We've treated medication like a lack of faith. We've told people to just pray more, have more faith, trust God more. And in doing so, we've caused immense harm to people whose brain chemistry needs medical intervention." "I felt that," Carlos said. "When I first went on antidepressants, people at my old church told me I was taking the easy way out. That real faith meant trusting God without crutches. It almost made me stop taking the medication that was saving my life." "That's spiritual abuse," Pastor Mike said firmly. "And I'm sorry you experienced it. God gave us brains capable of developing medication. Why wouldn't He want us to use it? We don't tell diabetics to pray instead of taking insulin. We don't tell people with cancer to have more faith instead of doing chemo. Mental illness is no different." Emma spoke up, which was rare for her in these meetings. "I think I needed to hear that. I've had this guilt about Marcus being in therapy and on anti-anxiety medication. Like if my faith was stronger, if I prayed more, if I was a better wife, he wouldn't need those things. But that's not how it works, is it?" "No," Jennifer said gently. "That's not how it works. Marcus's anxiety isn't a reflection of your faith or your adequacy as a wife. It's a reflection of how his brain is wired, and therapy and medication are tools that help him manage that wiring. You wouldn't feel guilty if he needed glasses to see better, right?" "That's a good way to put it," Emma said. After the meeting, Pastor Mike pulled me aside. "Marcus, I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been thinking about starting a mental health ministry here at the church, a more formal structure for supporting people who are struggling, support groups, resources, education for the congregation about mental health and faith. And I was wondering if you'd be interested in helping me develop it. I don't know if I'm qualified. I'm still figuring out my own stuff." "That's exactly why you're qualified. You're in the middle of it. You understand it from the inside, and you've already shown you can talk about it in ways that help people feel less alone." "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Marcus, don't let imposter syndrome keep you from using your story to help others. You don't have to be fully healed to be helpful. Sometimes the people who help us most are the ones who are still in process, but willing to be honest about it." On the drive home, Emma was quiet again, that processing quiet I'd come to recognize. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "About what Jennifer said, about how your anxiety isn't a reflection of my faith or my adequacy as a wife. I've been carrying that guilt for so long, Marcus. wondering what I did wrong, how I contributed to your struggle, whether I could fix you if I just loved you better. Emma, let me finish. I know intellectually that it's not my fault, but emotionally, I've been carrying this weight, this belief that if I were enough, pretty enough, supportive enough, understanding enough, you wouldn't struggle. And I'm learning that's not how it works. Your brain chemistry isn't about me. Your healing isn't my responsibility. And letting go of that guilt is part of me laying aside my own mental weight. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to feel responsible for my mental health. I know. And I'm learning that you didn't make me feel that way. I took it on myself. Just like you've been taking on weight that isn't yours to carry. We've both been carrying things we were never meant to carry alone. We drove in silence for a while, both of us processing these revelations. Pastor Mike asked me to help develop a mental health ministry at church, I said. Are you going to do it? I don't know. It feels like a lot. I'm still barely managing my own mental health. How can I help other people with theirs? Maybe that's the point, though. Maybe you don't have to be an expert. Maybe you just have to be honest about your process and trust that your honesty helps others feel less alone. That's essentially what Pastor Mike said. Then maybe you should listen to him. And to me, you've already been doing this, with your students, with David, with the people in small group. You've been helping people just by being willing to talk about your struggle. Making it formal doesn't change that. That night, I sat down with my journal and wrote out all the fears I had about taking on more responsibility before I was ready. Fear. I'm not healed enough to help others. Reality. I don't need to be fully healed to share my experience. I just need to be honest about where I am in the process. Fear, I'll say the wrong thing and make someone's mental health worse. Reality, I won't be working alone. There will be pastors, therapists, support structures. And my honesty won't make people worse. It will help them feel less alone. Fear, this will be too much pressure and I'll relapse under the weight of it. Reality, I have tools now. I have therapy, medication, community, awareness, and I can set boundaries. Helping others doesn't mean sacrificing my own mental health. Fear, I'm a fraud because I still struggle. Reality, everyone still struggles. Healing doesn't mean never having anxious thoughts again. It means knowing how to handle them when they come. Writing it out helped. I could see how my fears were based on old patterns, the need to be perfect before taking action, the belief that struggling meant failing, the assumption that helping others required having everything figured out. I prayed about it, not asking God to tell me what to do, but asking for wisdom, for discernment, for the courage to say yes if this was meant to be part of my healing journey. The next morning, I woke up with unexpected clarity. I texted Pastor Mike, I'm in. Let's build this mental health ministry together. His response came immediately. Thank God. This is going to help so many people. At school that day, I told Mr. Patterson I'd be willing to help with mental health initiatives. We scheduled a meeting to discuss what that might look like. Maybe a monthly assembly, maybe a peer support group, maybe resources for teachers about recognizing and responding to student mental health struggles. You know what I think? Mr. Patterson said. I think God orchestrated your breakdown. I looked at him, surprised. My breakdown? The panic attack, the voice you heard, whatever you want to call it. I think God knew that your struggle would become your ministry, that your pain would become your purpose, not because God caused the pain, but because God never wastes pain. He redeems it. I sat with that thought for the rest of the day. God never wastes pain. He redeems it. My anxiety, my years of mental weight, my struggle to be present, all of it could be redeemed, used, transformed into something that helped others, not because the struggle was good, but because nothing was wasted in God's economy. Everything could be used, even our pain. That afternoon, I had my session with Dr. Chen. I told her about the opportunities to help others, about my fears of not being ready, about my decision to say yes anyway. I think you're making a wise choice, she said, but I want to caution you about something. When we start helping others with their mental health, there's a temptation to neglect our own, to pour out without pouring in, to help everyone else while ignoring our own needs. How do I avoid that? Boundaries. You continue your own therapy. You continue your medication. You continue your small group. You continue practicing the skills you've learned. And you're honest when you need to step back, when it's too much, when you need to prioritize your own health. Helping others is beautiful, but not at the expense of your own healing. So it's another version of laying aside the mental weight, laying aside the weight of being responsible for everyone else's healing. Exactly. You can support, encourage, share your story, but you can't carry other people's weight for them. That's their work to do, just like this is your work to do. That evening, the whole family sat down for dinner together, something we'd been doing more consistently since I started this healing journey. Noah was telling us about a bug he'd found at school. Lily was sharing about a book she was reading, and Emma was laughing at something one of them said, and I was there, actually there. Present in the moment instead of lost in my head, analyzing the conversation or worrying about tomorrow or replaying today. It hit me suddenly. This was the miracle. Not that the anxiety was gone, not that I never had intrusive thoughts anymore, but that I could sit at this table with my family and actually be here with them, that I could hear Noah's story without simultaneously analyzing whether I was responding correctly, that I could see Lily's excitement without worrying about whether I was being a good enough father. This presence, this ability to just be, this was what lay aside the mental weight really meant. This was what God had been inviting me into all along. After the kids were in bed, I wrote in my journal, God, 6 weeks ago, you told me to lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. At first, I thought that meant the weight would disappear, that you would miraculously heal my anxiety and I'd be free. But I'm learning that's not what you meant. You meant you would carry what I couldn't carry, while I learned to stop carrying what I was never meant to carry. You meant you would hold me while I practiced setting down the rocks. You meant you would be present in my struggle while I learned new ways of being. And it's working. Slowly, imperfectly, but truly working. I can sit with my family without being lost in my head. I can teach my students without drowning in anxiety about their judgment. I can have difficult conversations without spiraling into catastrophic thinking. I can help others without sacrificing my own mental health. Not perfectly, not every time, but more often than before. And that's progress. Thank you for not wasting my pain, for taking years of mental weight and transforming it into something that can help others, for using my struggle to create connection, community, purpose. Thank you for the opportunities ahead, the mental health ministry, the school initiatives, the students who are asking for help because I was willing to be honest first. But help me remember what Dr. Chen said, that I can't help others at the expense of my own healing, that I need to keep doing my work, practicing my skills, maintaining my boundaries. Help me carry what's mine to carry while laying aside what isn't. Help me support others while protecting my own mental health. Help me be honest about my limitations while still showing up with my story. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. I'm learning, God. Still learning, still practicing, still growing. And that's exactly where I'm supposed to be. I closed the journal and sat in the quiet, feeling the weight of responsibility mixing with the lightness of purpose. It was a paradox I was learning to hold, the seriousness of helping others with their mental health balanced with the freedom of knowing I didn't have to have it all figured out. Tomorrow, I would wake up and practice again, setting down rocks, noticing thoughts without being controlled by them, being present with my family, my students, my community, and slowly, one choice at a time, I was becoming someone who knew how to live lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because I'd learned I didn't have to carry it alone. 3 months had passed since that Thursday night when I heard God speak. 12 weeks of daily practice, of choosing presence over rumination, of setting down mental rocks over and over until the motion became more natural. 12 weeks of therapy sessions, small group meetings, family dinners where I was actually present, students who felt safe enough to ask for help because I'd been willing to admit I needed it too. The mental health ministry at church was taking shape. Pastor Mike and I had spent hours planning, researching, reaching out to mental health professionals in the congregation who could provide guidance. We'd decided to launch with 3 components: a monthly educational series about mental health and faith, a resource center with information about local therapists and support groups, and expanded small groups specifically for people dealing with different mental health challenges. The school initiatives were moving forward too. Mr. Patterson had approved a peer support program that I'd helped facilitate, and we were planning a mental health awareness week for February. Several teachers had approached me privately about their own struggles, asking for advice, asking for hope, asking if it was really possible to get better. "How do you do it all?" David Chen asked me over lunch one day. "Teach full-time, go to therapy, run these programs, be present with your family. I feel exhausted just watching you." "I almost don't," I admitted. "I almost said no to everything because I was afraid of being overwhelmed. But Dr. Chen taught me something about the difference between healthy engagement and compulsive doing." "What's the difference?" "Healthy engagement comes from a place of purpose and passion. You're energized by it even when it's hard. Compulsive doing comes from anxiety, from feeling like you have to prove your worth or prevent catastrophe. It drains you even when it looks productive. And which one is this? Most of the time, healthy engagement. Sometimes I slip into compulsive mode, trying to help everyone, trying to be perfect, trying to prove I'm worthy of the opportunities. But I catch myself faster now, and I have people who help me see it when I can't." "Like who?" "Emma, Dr. Chen, Pastor Mike, the small group, even my kids in their own way. Lily told me last week that I was using my stressed voice and asked if I needed to do my breathing exercises." David laughed. "Kids are brutally honest." "They are, and I needed to hear it. I'd been taking on too much, trying to help too many people without protecting my own mental health. So I scaled back, said no to a few things, reminded myself that I can't pour from an empty cup. That afternoon, I had a meeting with Mr. Patterson and our school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, no relation to Emma Rodriguez, the student, about the peer support program. "We've had 12 students sign up as peer supporters," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "They'll go through training about how to listen, how to recognize warning signs, how to refer someone to professional help when needed. But Marcus, I want them to hear from you, your story, how you recognized you needed help and what getting help has looked like." You want me to share my story with a group of high school students?" "Yes, because they need to see that struggling with mental health doesn't mean you're weak or broken or unable to have a meaningful life. They need to see someone who's doing the work, who's getting better, who's using their own struggle to help others." My old patterns immediately kicked in. What if you say the wrong thing? What if you're too vulnerable? What if they judge you? What if sharing your story makes them see you differently as a teacher? But I'd learned to recognize these thoughts for what they were: anxiety trying to protect me by keeping me small, by keeping me hidden, by preventing the vulnerability that might lead to rejection, but also might lead to connection. I pictured each thought as a rock, set them down, and said yes. The following week, I met with the 12 students who'd signed up as peer supporters. They sat in a circle in Mrs. Rodriguez's office, looking both nervous and eager. "Mr. Carter is going to share his story with you," Mrs. Rodriguez began. "I want you to listen not just to the facts, but to what it took for him to be honest about his struggle, because that's what you'll be helping other students do. Find the courage to be honest, to ask for help, to know they're not alone." I took a breath and began. 3 months ago, I was drowning. Not literally, but mentally. I couldn't stop analyzing every conversation, every decision, every interaction. My mind was like a courtroom that never adjourned, constantly prosecuting me for things I'd said or done or might do wrong. The weight of all that mental activity was crushing me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't be present with my family. I was having physical symptoms, headaches, chest pain, exhaustion that wouldn't go away. I watched their faces. Some nodded, recognizing the description. Others looked uncomfortable, maybe realizing they experienced similar things. And then one night, when I was completely alone and completely overwhelmed, I heard a voice, or felt a presence. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it told me to lay aside the mental weight, that it would carry it for me. And that moment changed everything. What did you do? One student asked. I started therapy, got on medication for anxiety, joined a small group at my church where we talk honestly about mental health and faith, started learning techniques for managing my thoughts instead of being controlled by them. And most importantly, I stopped trying to do it alone. I let my wife help, let professionals help, let God help, however that works. Are you better now? Another student asked. That's a complicated question. I still have anxiety. I still have days when my mind wants to spiral. I still struggle sometimes to be present instead of lost in my head. But I'm better at catching myself, better at using the tools I've learned, better at asking for help when I need it. So am I cured? No. Am I healed? I'm healing, and that's okay. A girl named Sarah raised her hand. Mr. Carter, weren't you scared that people would judge you? Like when you told your students, weren't you worried we'd think you were weak? Terrified. I was terrified that you'd lose respect for me, that parents would complain, that the administration would think I was unfit to teach. But I was more terrified of what would happen if I kept pretending I was fine, because pretending I was fine was killing me. And did people judge you? Some probably did. But most people responded with relief. Relief that someone was finally being honest about struggling. Relief that they weren't alone. And the people who did judge, I had to learn that their judgment said more about them than about me. We talked for another hour. They asked questions about therapy, about medication, about how to know when to refer someone to professional help versus just being a supportive friend. They shared their own struggles, their own fears, their own experiences with mental health. When the meeting ended, several students stayed to talk privately. One boy told me he'd been having panic attacks, but hadn't told anyone because he thought it made him weak. One girl shared that she'd started cutting herself as a way to manage overwhelming emotions. Another student asked how to support a friend who'd been talking about suicide. Each conversation was heavy, important, sacred. And each one reminded me why I'd said yes to this work, despite my fears and limitations. That evening was our small group meeting. We were starting a new book about the spirituality of imperfection, and the first chapter was about embracing our brokenness instead of hiding it. I've been thinking about this idea, Jennifer said, that our brokenness isn't something to be fixed or hidden, but something to be embraced. And I struggle with it because my OCD is literally about trying to fix things, trying to make things perfect, trying to eliminate any possibility of something being wrong. What do you struggle with specifically? Pastor Mike asked. The idea that I should embrace my brokenness, because OCD is part of my brokenness, right? But if I embrace it, doesn't that mean I'm accepting it instead of trying to get better? Doesn't that mean I'm giving up? Carlos leaned forward. I've thought about this a lot with my depression, and here's what I've come to understand. Embracing your brokenness doesn't mean accepting it as permanent or unchangeable. It means accepting that it's real right now, that it's part of your story, that it doesn't make you less valuable or less worthy of love. It means stopping the fight against reality while still working toward healing. That's good, Amy said. I think with bipolar disorder, I spent years fighting against the reality of my diagnosis, denying it, being ashamed of it, trying to pretend it wasn't real, and all that fighting just made me sicker. When I finally embraced it, when I said, okay, this is my reality, this is part of my story, and I'm going to learn to manage it instead of fighting it, that's when real healing started. Emma spoke up. I've been thinking about this in terms of our marriage, about how I spent years trying to fix Marcus's anxiety instead of accepting that it was real and learning to support him through it, and my fighting against it, My trying to make it not be true actually made things worse for both of us. I reached for her hand, and I spent years fighting against my own anxiety, trying to think my way out of it, trying to control it, trying to pretend it wasn't as bad as it was. It wasn't until I embraced it, admitted it was real, accepted that I needed help, stopped fighting against the reality of my struggles, that I could actually start healing. Pastor Mike nodded. This is what the book calls the spirituality of imperfection. It's the recognition that we're all broken, we're all struggling, we're all carrying things we'd rather not carry. And the spiritual path isn't about fixing ourselves or perfecting ourselves. It's about accepting our brokenness, bringing it into community, letting God and others help us carry it. But doesn't God want us to be healed? Tom asked. Doesn't he want us to get better? I think God wants us to be whole, Pastor Mike said carefully. But wholeness and perfection aren't the same thing. Wholeness includes our brokenness. It integrates our struggles into our story instead of seeing them as obstacles to overcome. Paul wrote about his thorn in the flesh, some struggle that God wouldn't remove despite Paul's prayers. And God said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Not, "I'll fix your weakness," but "my power works through your weakness." The room was quiet as we all sat with that. So maybe, Jennifer said slowly, embracing my OCD doesn't mean giving up on getting better. It means accepting that this is part of my story, that God's power can work through it, that I can be whole even while being broken. I think that's exactly it, Pastor Mike said. After the meeting, Emma and I drove home in comfortable silence. At a stoplight, she turned to me. "Do you feel whole? With your anxiety, with all your struggles, do you feel whole?" I thought about it. I feel more whole now than I did when I was pretending to be perfect. When I was hiding my anxiety, compartmentalizing it, trying to manage it alone, I felt fractured, divided, like I was one person in public and another person in private. Now, even though I'm openly struggling, I feel more integrated, more like all my parts belong to one person instead of being separate selves I have to manage. That's beautiful. What about you? Do you feel whole? I'm learning to. I spent years defining myself by your struggles. The worried wife, the caretaker, the one trying to hold everything together. And I'm learning that I'm more than that I have my own identity, my own struggles, my own journey, that I can love you and support you without losing myself in the process. When we got home, both kids were already asleep. My mother-in-law had stayed with them during the small group meeting. Emma and I made tea and sat on the couch, something we'd been doing more regularly, just being together without agenda or distraction. "Can I tell you something?" Emma said. "I'm proud of us, of what we're building together, of how we're facing our struggles instead of hiding them, of how we're letting our kids see real faith, real struggle, real healing, instead of performing perfection for them." "Me too, and Emma, thank you." "For what?" "For staying. For not leaving when I was drowning and taking you down with me. For doing your own work instead of just waiting for me to get better. For being honest about your struggles too. For building this with me instead of just watching me build it." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Where else would I go? You're my person, broken, healing, struggling, growing. You're my person." We sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet, both of us learning what it meant to be whole while being broken, to be healing while still struggling, to be held while being imperfect. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. Not because I was anxious and needed to burn off nervous energy, but because I wanted to be outside, to be present with the morning, to notice the world without analyzing it. The Portland rain had cleared overnight, leaving everything fresh and clean. I walked through my neighborhood, noticing things I'd walked past 1,000 times without seeing. The way morning light caught the wet leaves, the sound of birds beginning their day, an elderly neighbor tending his garden even though it was barely dawn. My mind tried its usual routines, planning the day, analyzing yesterday's conversations, worrying about tomorrow's responsibilities, but I caught it earlier now. Noticed the thoughts arising, pictured them as rocks, set them down and returned to the present moment. What is happening right now? I'm walking, I'm breathing, I'm noticing. That's all. When I got home, Emma was in the kitchen making coffee. "You went for a walk," she observed. "I did, and I was actually present for it, actually saw the neighborhood instead of just walking through it while lost in my head. That's huge." "It is. 3 months ago, I couldn't have done that. Couldn't have just walked without my mind spiraling. But I'm learning, slowly but learning." Lily came downstairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Daddy, can we make pancakes?" "Sure, sweetheart." We made pancakes together, and I was present for it. Present for her chattering about her dreams, present for the way she carefully measured ingredients with her tongue sticking out in concentration, present for the moment she successfully flipped her first pancake and squealed with pride. This, I thought, this is what laying aside the mental weight makes possible. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but presence. The ability to be here, in this moment with this person, creating this memory. After breakfast, I had my weekly session with Dr. Chen. I told her about the peer support training, about the small group discussion on embracing brokenness, about feeling more whole, even while openly struggling. "You've come a long way," she said. "From that first session where you were terrified, you were losing your mind, to now, where you're helping other people navigate their own mental health journeys. I still have hard days, days when the old patterns come back strong. Of course. But what's different about the hard days now?" I thought about it. I don't catastrophize them anymore. I don't treat a hard day as evidence that I've failed or that I'm not really getting better. I just treat it as a hard day. Something to move through instead of something to be destroyed by. That's significant growth. You've developed psychological flexibility, the ability to experience difficult thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them. That's what makes sustainable mental health possible. Can I ask you something? When do I not need therapy anymore? Like, what's the end point? There isn't necessarily an end point. Some people do therapy for a specific issue and then stop. Others, especially those managing chronic conditions like anxiety disorders, continue therapy long-term as maintenance and support. There's no right answer. It depends on what serves you best. I think I want to keep coming. Maybe not weekly forever, but regularly, because this hour is when I do my deepest work on myself, when I examine patterns I can't see on my own, when I have someone who knows my whole story holding me accountable to my growth. Then we'll keep working together, and we'll adjust frequency as needed. That evening, I sat down to prepare for the mental health ministry launch at church. Pastor Mike and I were hosting an informational meeting for people interested in joining the various small groups we were forming. One for anxiety and depression, one for grief and loss, one for addiction recovery, one for families dealing with mental illness. I'd prepared remarks about my own journey, about what I'd learned, about why this ministry mattered. But as I looked over what I'd written, I felt the old familiar weight trying to settle back on my shoulders. What if no one comes? What if you say the wrong thing? What if people judge the church for being so open about mental health? What if this whole thing fails? I stopped, took a breath, noticed the thoughts without engaging with them. These are just thoughts, just my anxiety trying to protect me from potential failure. But failure isn't what I need protection from. What I need protection from is letting anxiety keep me from doing meaningful work. I picked up my phone and texted the small group. Feeling anxious about tomorrow's ministry launch. Could use prayer, encouragement. Within minutes, responses flooded in. Jennifer, praying for you. Remember, you don't have to be perfect, just honest. Carlos, you've already helped so many people just by being willing to share your story. Tomorrow is just more of that. Amy, God's power is made perfect in weakness. Your anxiety doesn't disqualify you. It qualifies you. Pastor Mike, I'm grateful to be doing this with you. We're going to help a lot of people, and it's okay to be nervous about it. I sat there looking at my phone, tears in my eyes, feeling held by this community that had become essential to my healing. This was what laying aside the mental weight really meant, not doing it alone, not being strong enough to handle everything myself, but letting others help carry what I couldn't carry alone. That night, I prayed differently than I had 3 months ago. Less desperate, less pleading, more conversational, like talking to someone I'd come to know and trust. God, tomorrow we launch this mental health ministry. Tomorrow we create a space for people to bring their brokenness, their struggles, their honest questions about how faith and mental health intersect. I'm nervous. I'm afraid I'll say the wrong thing, that people won't come, that this will somehow fail. But underneath the nervousness, I feel something else. Excitement, purpose, hope. Because 3 months ago, you spoke to me when I was drowning. You told me to lay aside the mental weight. You promised you would carry it. And you've kept that promise every single day since then, not by taking away my anxiety, but by giving me tools to manage it, by surrounding me with people who help carry it, by working through therapy and medication and community and practice, by being present in my struggle instead of removing me from it. And now you're inviting me to help others lay aside their mental weight too, to create spaces where people can be honest about struggling, where brokenness isn't something to hide, but something to share, where healing happens in community instead of isolation. I don't have it all figured out. I still struggle. I still have hard days. I'm still learning, still practicing, still growing. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the best people to help others heal are the ones who are still healing themselves, who remember what it's like to drown, who know the difference between drowning and swimming, who can say, I've been where you are and I'm finding my way forward and you can too. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. Thank you for keeping that promise. Thank you for carrying what I couldn't carry. Thank you for teaching me, slowly and patiently, how to set down the rocks and trust that you're holding them. Tomorrow, help me share that message with others who are drowning. Help them hear what I heard, that they don't have to carry the weight alone, that healing is possible, that God catches sinkers, and help me remember when my own anxiety tries to convince me otherwise, that I'm living proof of that truth. I closed my journal and sat in the quiet, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose. Tomorrow would come, with all its uncertainties and possibilities, but tonight I was okay, more than okay. I was whole, even in my brokenness, healing, even in my struggling, held, even in my imperfection, and that was more than enough. 6 months had passed since that Thursday night when God spoke 7 words that changed my life. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. 6 months of daily practice, of choosing presence over rumination, of learning to observe my thoughts without being controlled by them. 6 months of therapy, medication, community, and the slow, patient work of rewiring decades of unhealthy mental patterns. Today was the culmination of much of that work, the official launch of Hope and Healing, the mental health ministry at church that Pastor Mike and I had been building together. I woke up early, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. Emma was still asleep beside me, and I lay there for a moment practicing presence, feeling the weight of the blanket, hearing the rain against the window, noticing my breath moving in and out, just being, without analyzing or planning or worrying. My mind tried its familiar routines. What if no one comes? What if you say something that triggers someone? What if people think this is too secular for church? What if... I stopped, recognized the thoughts, allowed them to be there without fighting them, investigated where I felt them in my body, a slight tightness in my chest, a familiar flutter in my stomach, and then nurtured myself through it. I put my hand on my heart. It's okay to be nervous about today. This matters to you. But you don't have to carry the weight of making it perfect. You just have to show up honestly and trust that God will use your honesty to help others. You've got this. You're not alone. The RAIN technique had become second nature now. Recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. It didn't eliminate anxiety, but it changed my relationship with it. Anxiety was no longer my enemy or my identity. It was just a feeling passing through, like clouds moving across the sky. Emma stirred and opened her eyes. Today's the big day. It is. I'm nervous. That's okay. Nervous means it matters. You're going to be amazing. What if I'm not? Then you'll be honest and imperfect, which is exactly what people need to see. No one needs another person pretending to have it all together. They need someone willing to say, I'm still learning, and you can learn too. We got up and went through our morning routine together, making coffee, making breakfast, getting the kids ready for the day. All of it done with presence, with attention, with the ability to actually be here instead of lost in my head planning or worrying or analyzing. "Daddy, why are you dressed up?" Lily asked, noticing I was wearing slacks and a button-down instead of my usual weekend casual clothes. "I'm helping start something new at church today, a group for people who are struggling with hard things in their minds and hearts. Like your anxiety?" "Exactly like my anxiety. A place where people can talk about it honestly, instead of pretending everything is fine." "That's good," she said matter-of-factly. "Pretending is exhausting." Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. She was right. Pretending was exhausting. Being honest, even when it was vulnerable, was actually easier in the long run. The launch event was scheduled for 2 p.m. We'd planned a presentation about the ministry, testimonies from several people, including me, information about the various support groups we were forming, and resources for finding professional help. Pastor Mike had been promoting it for weeks, but we had no idea how many people would come. At 1:30, I arrived at the church to help set up. Pastor Mike was already there, arranging chairs and testing the microphone. "Ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be. How about you?" "Nervous, excited, hopeful, all of it at once." He paused, looking at me seriously. "Marcus, I want you to know something. What you've done, being willing to be vulnerable about your struggle, using your pain to help others, building this ministry while still doing your own healing work, it's extraordinary. You've changed this church, you've changed lives, and it's only just beginning. I couldn't have done it without you, without Emma, without Dr. Chen and the small group and everyone who's carried me through this. That's the point, isn't it? None of us can do it alone. We're all carrying each other." People started arriving around 1:45. Jennifer and Carlos from our small group there to share their testimonies. David Chen from school, curious about what we'd built. Several families I recognized from church. Emma Rodriguez and her parents, who'd become advocates for teen mental health after watching their daughter's transformation through therapy. And then people I didn't recognize. People who'd heard about the ministry and came because they were struggling, because they were looking for hope, because they needed to know they weren't alone. By 2 p.m. every chair was filled and people were standing in the back. We'd expected maybe 30 people. There were at least 80. Pastor Mike opened with a prayer, and then he introduced the ministry. "Hope and healing exists because we believe 2 things," he said. "First, that mental health struggles are real, valid, and deserve the same compassion and support as physical health struggles. And second, that faith and mental health aren't enemies, they're partners in the journey toward wholeness." He talked about the various support groups we were forming, the educational resources we'd be providing, the professional counselors who'd agreed to offer sliding scale services for church members who couldn't afford full-price therapy. Then it was time for testimonies. Carlos went first, sharing about his depression following job loss, about how medication and therapy had saved his life, about how he'd learned that God's healing often works through medicine and professionals rather than in spite of them. Jennifer went next, talking about her OCD, about intrusive thoughts that tormented her, about learning that thoughts aren't facts and that she could observe them without being controlled by them. And then it was my turn. I walked to the front, my heart pounding, my hands slightly shaking. I looked out at the crowd, familiar faces and strangers, young and old, people visibly struggling and people hiding it well. And I took a breath. "My name is Marcus, and 6 months ago I was drowning in mental weight I couldn't set down." I told them everything, about the constant analysis, the mental courtroom that never adjourned, the inability to be present with my family because I was always lost in my head, about the physical symptoms, the deteriorating marriage, the teaching that suffered, the life that looked fine from the outside but felt like dying from the inside. And then one Thursday night, when I was completely alone and completely overwhelmed, I heard a voice. It said, "Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it." I watched people lean forward, fully present with my story. At first, I thought that meant the weight would magically disappear, that God would heal me instantly and I'd never struggle again. But that's not what happened. What happened was I started learning, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, how to actually lay aside the weight, how to set down thoughts instead of carrying them, how to trust that God was carrying what I couldn't carry, while I learned to stop carrying what I was never meant to carry alone. I talked about therapy, about Dr. Chen teaching me cognitive techniques, about medication helping regulate the brain chemistry that had been making everything harder, about the small group where I learned I wasn't alone, about Emma doing her own work instead of just waiting for me to get better, about my students and colleagues who found courage to seek help because I'd been willing to admit I needed it. "I'm not cured," I said. "I still have anxiety. I still have days when my mind wants to spiral. I still struggle sometimes to be present instead of lost in worry about the future or regret about the past. But I'm healing, I'm learning, I'm growing, and most importantly, I'm not doing it alone anymore." I paused, looking out at the faces watching me. Some had tears in their eyes, others were nodding, recognizing their own stories in mine. If you're here today because you're drowning in mental weight you can't set down, I want you to hear this. You're not alone. Your struggle is real and valid, and healing is possible. Not necessarily quick or easy or linear, but possible. God can work through therapy and medication and community and honest conversation. You don't have to choose between faith and mental health care. They work together. I told them about the support groups we were forming, about the resources available, about how to take that first scary step of admitting you need help. And if you're here because someone you love is struggling, I want you to hear this too. You can't fix them. You can't love them hard enough to make their mental illness go away. But you can support them. You can encourage them to get professional help. You can learn about their condition. You can be present with them in their struggle instead of trying to rescue them from it. That's what Emma did for me, and it made all the difference. When I finished and sat down, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and then another person, and then everyone was applauding. And I realized people weren't just clapping for my story. They were clapping because they saw themselves in it, because they felt less alone, because someone had finally said out loud what they'd been afraid to admit. After the presentation, we had a time for questions and conversation. People lined up to talk to us, some wanting information about the support groups, others wanting to share their own stories, many just needing to be seen and heard and validated in their struggles. An older man approached me, probably in his 70s. "I've been dealing with anxiety for 50 years, he said, "and this is the first time I've heard someone in a church say it's okay to take medication, that it's not a lack of faith. Thank you for that. You just freed me from decades of guilt." A young woman, maybe early 20s, told me she'd been suicidal, but was afraid to tell anyone at church because she thought they'd just tell her to pray more. Knowing there's a group here where I can be honest about how much I'm struggling, it gives me hope. A father with 2 teenagers wanted to know how to talk to his kids about mental health, how to create a home where they felt safe admitting when they were struggling. David Chen found me during a break. Man, that was powerful. I'm thinking about starting something similar at school, maybe a mental health awareness week with speakers and resources and education for students and teachers. Do it. I'll help however I can. Emma Rodriguez and her parents approached together. "Mr. Carter," Emma said, "I wanted to introduce you to some of my friends from school. After hearing you speak, they want to know more about getting help." Indeed. I spent the next 20 minutes talking to teenagers who were carrying mental weight they'd been too scared to set down, who thought asking for help meant weakness, who needed permission to be honest about struggling. When the event finally ended around 5 p.m., I was exhausted but energized. drained but filled, the kind of tired that comes from meaningful work rather than anxious striving. Pastor Mike and I cleaned up together, putting away chairs and gathering information sheets people had left behind. 83 people, he said. 83 people in this church who are struggling with mental health or loving someone who is. And those are just the ones who came today. How many more are still hiding, still pretending, still suffering in silence? A lot, probably. But we're creating a space for them now, a place where they can stop hiding. This is just the beginning, Marcus. This ministry is going to grow beyond what we can imagine. When I got home that evening, I was greeted by chaos. Lily and Noah were chasing each other through the living room. Emma was attempting to make dinner while refereeing their game, and the dog had apparently gotten into something he shouldn't have and was looking guilty in the corner. Normal, beautiful, chaotic family life. "How'd it go?" Emma called from the kitchen. "Amazing. Overwhelming. 83 people came." 83! Marcus, that's incredible. The kids ran to me, hugging my legs, talking over each other about their day. And I was there for it. Actually present. Actually engaged. Actually able to receive their love and chaos and excitement without my mind being somewhere else. After dinner and bedtime routines and the usual evening chaos, Emma and I finally sat down together on the couch with tea. "I'm really proud of you," she said. "Not just for today, but for the whole journey, for being willing to admit you were drowning, for doing the hard work of healing, for using your pain to help others, for becoming someone who can actually be present with us. I couldn't have done it without you being willing to do your own work, without you giving me space to struggle while also holding me accountable to growth, without you believing that change was possible even when I wasn't sure. We did it together. That's the point. Neither of us could have done this alone." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us reflecting on how far we'd come in 6 months. "Can I tell you something?" Emma said. "I'm not scared anymore." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing you to your anxiety. For years, I was terrified that one day you'd be so far in your head that I couldn't reach you, that you'd be gone even while being physically present. But I'm not scared of that anymore. Not because you don't still struggle, but because I trust now that you know how to manage it, that you have tools, that you're committed to the work, that you're not alone in it. That means everything to me." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat with my journal and wrote, "God, 6 months ago you spoke to me. 7 words that changed everything. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it." At the time, I had no idea what that would mean, no idea how hard it would be, no idea how much work laying aside would require, no idea how slowly and imperfectly healing would come, but you knew. You knew exactly what you were inviting me into, not a magic cure, not an instant transformation, but a journey, a daily practice. A slow rewiring of patterns that had been forming for decades. You knew I'd need therapy to learn cognitive techniques, medication to help regulate brain chemistry, community to remind me I wasn't alone, Emma to walk this path with me, Dr. Chen to guide the process, Pastor Mike to create space for ministry, the small group to hold me accountable, my students to show me that vulnerability creates connection. You knew that laying aside the mental weight wasn't about eliminating anxiety. It was about changing my relationship with it, learning to observe thoughts without being controlled by them, learning to be present instead of lost in rumination, learning to trust that I'm held even when I can't feel the hands holding me. And you knew that my pain would become my purpose, that my struggle would create compassion for others who struggle, that my healing journey would light the path for others trying to find their way out of darkness. Today, 83 people showed up to a mental health ministry that exists because you spoke to me in my drowning. 83 people who are struggling, who are suffering, who need to know they're not alone. And because I was willing to be honest about my struggle, they have a place now where they can be honest too. That's the miracle, isn't it? Not that you took away my anxiety, but that you used my anxiety to create something that helps others, that you redeemed my pain, that you never wasted any of it. I'm not who I was 6 months ago. I'm not cured or perfect or free from struggle, but I'm healing. I'm growing. I'm learning to live lighter. I can be present with my family now. I can teach without drowning in analysis of every word I say. I can have difficult conversations without spiraling into catastrophic thinking. I can help others without sacrificing my own mental health. I can sit with uncertainty without needing to control every outcome. Not perfectly, not every time, but more often than before. And that's enough. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. Thank you for keeping that promise, for carrying what I couldn't carry, for teaching me to set down what I was never meant to carry alone. Thank you for the community that has formed around this work, for Jennifer and Carlos and Amy and Tom and Pastor Mike and David and Emma Rodriguez and all the others who've been brave enough to be honest about their struggles. Thank you for Emma, who did her own work while I did mine, who learned to surrender her need to control my healing, who chose to stay even when leaving would have been easier. Thank you for Lily and Noah, who are growing up in a home where mental health is talked about openly, where struggling is normalized, where asking for help is modeled instead of hidden. Thank you for Dr. Chen, who taught me that healing is possible even when it's not quick or easy or linear. And thank you for the journey ahead, for the people I'll meet who need to hear that they're not alone, for the ministry that will continue to grow and help more people, for the daily practice of setting down mental rocks and trusting that you're carrying them. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, what challenges will come, what struggles will resurface, what new growth will be required, but I know you're carrying tomorrow, just like you've been carrying every yesterday since that Thursday night when you spoke to me. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. I'm learning to trust that promise more deeply every day, to live as if it's true, to help others discover it's true for them too. Thank you, God, for everything, for the struggle and the healing, for the pain and the redemption, for the weight and the lightness, for all of it. I closed my journal and sat in the quiet, feeling the weight of the day, not mental weight, but the good weight of meaningful work, of purpose fulfilled, of lives touched. Emma appeared in the doorway. Coming to bed? Yeah, just finishing some journaling. She came and sat beside me. Can I read it? I handed her the journal, and she read silently, tears forming in her eyes. This is beautiful, she said when she finished. You should share it with the support group, or maybe even use parts of it in your teaching. This journey you've been on, it's going to help so many people. It already has, and that's the most surprising part. I thought my struggle was something to be ashamed of, something to hide, but it turns out it's the most useful thing about me. The thing that connects me to others, the thing that helps people feel less alone. We went to bed that night, and I fell asleep quickly, peacefully, without my mind keeping me awake with analysis or worry or rumination. 6 months ago, that would have been impossible. 6 months ago, I would have lain awake replaying every word I'd said at the event, analyzing whether I'd been good enough, worrying about what people thought, catastrophizing about all the ways the ministry might fail. But now I could let the day be finished, could trust that I'd done my best, could release the outcome and trust that God was working in ways I couldn't see or control. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. I'd learned what that meant now. It meant doing my work while trusting the outcome. It meant showing up honestly while surrendering the need to be perfect. It meant accepting help while taking responsibility. It meant being present today while trusting that tomorrow was already taken care of. The mental weight hadn't disappeared. It probably never would completely. My brain was still wired toward anxiety, toward overthinking, toward carrying things that weren't mine to carry, but I'd learned to recognize it, to observe it, to set it down, to trust it would be carried by hands stronger and more capable than mine. And in the space created by setting down that weight, life had become possible again. Not perfect life, not struggle-free life, but real life, present life, connected life, meaningful life. I'd learned to live lighter, not by eliminating the weight, but by sharing it, by letting God carry what God offered to carry, by letting community help hold what I couldn't hold alone, by accepting that struggling didn't mean failing, that healing wasn't perfection, that wholeness included my brokenness. Morning came gently, without alarm. I woke naturally, peacefully, to sunlight streaming through the window and Emma's hand in mine. A new day, a fresh start, another opportunity to practice what I'd been learning for 6 months. I didn't know what today would bring, what thoughts would arise, what struggles would surface, what opportunities would appear, but I knew I wasn't facing it alone, that the mental weight that had crushed me for so long was now something I could manage, that God's promise was still true, still active, still carrying me forward. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. 7 words that had saved my life. 7 words that were now helping others find hope too. 7 words I would carry with me, not as a burden but as a promise, for the rest of my life. I got up quietly, careful not to wake Emma, and went to the window. Looked out at Portland waking up, at the world continuing its patient turn, at all the people out there carrying their own mental weight, their own struggles, their own burdens they weren't meant to carry alone. And I whispered a prayer for all of them, for everyone drowning, for everyone struggling, for everyone who needed to hear what I'd heard that Thursday night 6 months ago. God, speak to them too. Tell them to lay aside their mental weight. Tell them you'll carry it. And help them trust that it's true, that healing is possible, that they're not alone, that tomorrow is already taken care of. In the quiet morning, I felt that familiar presence, the one that had spoken to me when I was drowning, the one that had been with me every day since, carrying what I couldn't carry, teaching me to live lighter. And I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than thought, that God was already speaking to others who needed to hear. Already inviting them to lay aside their weight, already promising to carry it. My job wasn't to fix everyone or save everyone or heal everyone. My job was just to be honest about my journey, to share what I'd learned, to create space for others to be honest too, to remind people they weren't alone, and that was exactly what I would keep doing. One conversation at a time, one small group meeting at a time, one honest moment at a time, learning to live lighter and helping others do the same. Lay aside the mental weight. I will carry it. A promise kept, a life transformed, a ministry born, a community healed, and it all started with 7 words spoken into darkness. 7 words that brought light. 7 words that changed everything.